Michael, he's doing the people on camera initially is me, and for probably over an hour.
Okay.
You can try it since that does.
Yeah, what's its background?
Okay, live.
Okay, we're going to start the meeting. Thank you. Welcome to the, we're getting kickback here. Got it? Okay, welcome to the Sangamon Valley Unified School District Board of Education meeting. We want to let the public know that we are video recording tonight's board meeting. The recording is being live streamed on the district's YouTube channel, and a link to the recording has been posted to the district's website. We can introduce the board members. Ken Mintz, if you'll raise your hand, member of the board. Suzanne Ordway, there you go. Mark Jewett, who's our vice president. Rachel Hurd, board member, thank you. We're going to now do the Pledge of Allegiance. If you'll all join me, please, in the pledge. Ready? Begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we're on to item 6.0, report of actions taken in closed session. During the evening's closed session, the Board of Education made the following administrative appointments effective July 1, 2020. Hong Nguyen has been selected as our new principal at Rancho Romero Elementary. Congratulations to Dr. Nguyen. We're now on to item 7.1, minutes of the June 9th, 2020 board meeting. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
A motion from Ken Mintz. Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Susanna Ordway. Is there any comments, questions? Hearing none, I'll call for the question. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, say no. Motion carries unanimously.
So I think Rachel,
Yeah, we've lost Rachel.
we've lost
Uh-oh,
her.
we've lost Rachel.
You just wait a minute.
She'll come back, I hope. Well, we'll wait about 10 or 15 seconds, see if she comes back. Okay. Hopefully she will return.
We're not taking any action for a bit.
Well, we have acceptance of open session agenda. So we're gonna, this is a routine matter, so we're gonna do 8.1, acceptance of the open session agenda. Is there a motion?
So moved.
I have a motion from Susanna. Is there a second?
Second.
And is seconding. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Motion passes unanimously. 8.2, approval of consent agenda. We are going to remove 11.3 and 11.5 from consent, and we are going to be moving that to the front of action item. That's typically what we do when we move something from consent. There were a number of comments and questions raised by members of the public. So other than those two items that we're removing onto action instead of consent, do I have a motion on 8.2, approval of consent?
So moved.
Okay, I have Ken made a motion, Rachel was a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, and then Mr. Mintz, do you have a comment to make about?
No, because the ones you're moving are ones that I have
Oh.
to take action on.
Okay, got it. We're on to 9.1, public comment for non-agenda items. And let's see here, hold on a second. Non-agenda item, I turned over to Rick Schmidt. He has an item or comment that was received.
There was one comment on a non-open session agenda item, although it was related to a confidential closed session item. So there'll be no comment on that. And the public comment was in regards to legal special ed settlements. Again, they are confidential.
So we're now going on to 9.2, the continual 2021 school reopening together phase 3 planning update. And before we have the update, I'm going to turn it over to Rick to talk about public comments that we have received.
Thank you, President Marvel. So we had 62 public comment cards submitted. Thank you, community, for engaging with our trustees and the staff. The way that played out for us was on the 9.2 topic of reopening. There were 31 public comments. Generally, the topics under the reopening guidelines were opinions and thoughts and questions and concerns and suggestions about the options we have before us this evening. And then also about the concern about health and safety of kids, families, and staff. In regards to item 10.4, which is the item for assistant superintendent contract extension and salary increase for 1, we received 13. And the general idea there was, and some of those were questions, which we will address during those items. Why do we extend contracts for assistant superintendents, and questions about the salary? And those will be addressed later this evening as part of those topics. There were 15 comments on budget items over $50,000, and that was in the consent agenda. And those items will be addressed at some point later this evening. And then the last 3 comments were individual comments on 3 different items. There was 1 comment about adopted budget, and that will be addressed during the 10.2 item. There was 1 comment on live streaming high school athletics, and that's 11.6. And there was 1 comment about routine, is also in consent item 11.8. Total of 62 comments.
Okay, thank you.
One further point I should have mentioned in the introduction, every single one of those comments will be posted to our website tomorrow, as all of our public comments have been posted in detail, word for word.
Okay, we're on then to
Greg, I have one question on that then. I'm sorry. Given that we had comments on items from the consent calendar, we've just voted on that consent calendar. Is there anything we need to share about those comments? Normally, we would pull an item if someone had a comment on them from a consent calendar.
So I believe on the budget items over 50,000, either trustees and or staff will be prepared to, I believe, address many of those. And one thing I also mentioned and did not is that each trustee has seen every single one of those 62 public comments prior to the meeting in their entirety.
But we got to remember, we pulled 11.3 from consent. It's going to be on action.
11.3 and 11.5.
11.3 and
The
11.5.
last couple were on 11.6 and 11.8, however. The live streaming media issue.
Yes.
Okay. Just recognizing for the audience that in fact we did get these comments and we have reviewed them prior to voting.
That was in support of live streaming.
Individually.
So Ken, you're very faint. And we have a technical issue. I don't know if it's you or it's all right.
Is that any better?
A little.
Not a little better, maybe?
Okay.
Okay. It just seemed like you were muffled.
Okay.
I wasn't sure if it was your end or our end. All right. So we're going to go on to 9.2.
Greg, Rachel.
Yeah. Oh, Rachel. Yes.
I was wondering, I know we already voted on consent, but I was wondering if it would be possible for us to do a friendly amendment to pull the live streaming one. There was a question that I wanted to ask about that, and it got past me before, I didn't mark it first. And then given that there's also a public comment about it, would that be agreeable?
Yeah. All right. So you would ask to have 11.6 pulled for discussion and action when we get to area 10 of the agenda.
Yes.
And is there any other item you'd like to have pulled while we're at it?
No.
That's it. Okay, is that it? All right, I need a motion to accept the amendment.
Second.
Motion and a second. Okay. Was there a second?
I was second.
Okay. Who made the motion? Rachel?
Rachel.
Okay, got it. All right. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, so we amended our consent action to move another item to 11.6 to our area 10, which is where we take action. Okay, reopening together, phase 3 planning update. I turn it over to staff.
Thank you, President Marvel. I'd like to introduce this item tonight and really build what I think is a good platform for what I think will be a really healthy discussion among trustees, staff, and hopefully it looks like we've got about 500 or 600 community members watching this evening. So I am looking forward, as I mentioned, to our staff presenting an update on current conditions in California and the region, health and safety, possible reopening options for our students, staff, and families, curriculum and instruction, social emotional considerations, and grading. We will also address some future considerations that we won't discuss tonight, but likely we'll discuss at our next meeting next month. As you know, in spite of some of what we've heard and what we've read, approximately 94% of school districts in the United States, based on a Washington Post article over the weekend, have not yet made specific reopening plans. The headline was "Uncertainty in America." Speaking of uncertainty, what I'd like to do is read what I think are two appropriate quotes to frame our conversation for tonight. The first being from Dr. Catherine Rowe, president of William and Mary College, and it came from a piece that 60 Minutes did on June 14th. According to Dr. Rowe, quote unquote, "Our greatest burden in this country now is the weight of uncertainty. Human beings loathe uncertainty. We will do almost anything not to have it. We are being called to tolerate uncertainty at a really high level right now. Community, kids, staff, parents, thank you for your patience. I know this is not easy. Trustees, thank you for allowing staff to take their time, to be patient, to analyze, to figure out how best to weigh risk. This is personal. This is difficult. The health and safety of kids is your very first priority, trustees. I know that." The second quote is from the UC Berkeley Chancellor. Many of you may have read it. It made national headlines last week, including in our local publications, the East Bay Times, announcing that for the most part in the fall, Cal Berkeley will be remote. This is a quote from the Chancellor at UC Berkeley. "Between now and the start of the fall semester, we will continue to operate amid great uncertainty. It is an uncomfortable feeling for many of us, requiring enormous flexibility, patience, resilience, and grace. All of the unknowns make for a very challenging planning environment, and ultimately we must be prepared at very short notice to reduce or limit on-campus activities and move to fully remote teaching should the pandemic conditions worsen or at any point before the end of the fall. We also must point out that while we do our utmost to mitigate risk associated with school opening on campus, we cannot eliminate them altogether. Nationally, throughout California, regionally, and locally, leaders, moms, kids, elected officials, each and every day are becoming frustrated and looking for solutions. Staff is working hard on those solutions. I know each of you are trustees. There is risk, and this weighs heavily on you and all of us. There is no simple solutions. We have been in regular contact, oftentimes more than once each day, with state and regional public health officers, including yesterday with a lengthy call with the infectious disease doctors here in Contra Costa County. Because of their new information, which you'll hear about in a few minutes, there is a potential pathways to 5 days a week, full time. Those are not easy answers, but a good discussion tonight. A quote from an infectious disease doctor on our call yesterday with all 18 county superintendents was that the science is still thin around COVID. However, COVID is undeniably in a difficult place, but our job is to communicate effectively and provide all the support and help we can for public schools to reopen. Reopening is not simple, as I said, but in spite of what many of us have heard and read, there is no absolute right way or pathway. Even in our own community, and you'll see some of the results tonight, thousands of opinions, very few of them are aligned. Finally, what I'd like to say is that I feel like we are in good hands. The guidance and the orders that we received from the state change, one even just since our board meeting began at 5 o'clock. In the midst of all this uncertainty, there's only one thing I'm certain of, that our trustees have the overall of our community in mind, and ultimately will make a thoughtful and informed decision, I believe, at some point mid-month in July, to give families and staff time to look at all of the options and then begin to plan to get back to school on August 11th, whatever that may look like. Amidst all of this chaos and uncertainty, because of the 5 of our trustees, we are really in good hands. Families and staff, thank you for your patience with trustees, and thank you for your patience with staff. This is not easy. And then lastly, I do not believe that a decision should be made within the next week or two, simply because the districts who have made decisions are having to walk those back and change those, and making plans and suggesting any one pathway is the best pathway now is likely not prudent. So thank you for letting me introduce this topic tonight. I'm excited to hear from all of you. We've heard from our community thousands and thousands of data points, including surveys and emails and communication in group settings and individual settings. I'm going to turn it over to Assistant Superintendent of Ed Services, Christine Guajardo, and Assistant Superintendent of Business Operations, Danny Hillman, to begin our reopening together discussion.
Thank you, Rick. I'm going to go ahead and let this presentation just get uploaded. Good evening, trustees. Thank you for having us here this evening. We are extremely excited and passionate about the work we are going to share with you surrounding our fall reopening options, ideas, and things for you to consider as you make the best decision for our students in San Ramon Valley Unified. Before we begin this evening, I did want to take a moment just to acknowledge the Herculean efforts of so many departments in this building. Some have to be mentioned: Ed Services, Human Resources, Technology, and Facilities. We all have worked together over the past 6 to 8 weeks to really make tonight's presentation important and valuable to all of you. I would also like to take a moment to acknowledge our staff, our labor partners, our parents and students, and most importantly, our steering committee members that really did include staff members, CSEA, SEIU members, and many people from departments across this district to support the efforts and contributions that were made to this presentation tonight. All right, so the next slide is really an overview of tonight's presentation to really set the tone and for you to have the ability to capture the overall structure and ideas that we're going to present this evening to really help you make the best decision to open in the fall. The first the first topic on the agenda for tonight is our current conditions. We're going to spend some time tonight really going through what's important to us in SRVUSD and what's important we feel for our trustees to consider. The second thing that we're going to talk about is we're really going to dive into the health and safety considerations. Many of these considerations have changed and evolved hourly. So tonight we're going to spend some time really diving into those and giving you the most up-to-date current information. Third on the list is our 3 options for reopening. We are extremely proud around the work and the time and the collaboration that's been put forth to be thoughtful about what's best for our children and to provide you trustees with 3 options that we feel are great opportunities for kids, each within their own right. The fourth area tonight that we're going to cover is curriculum and instruction, specifically focusing in on our remote learning improvements and how we want to better our service to students when they're learning from home. The fifth item we're going to cover is our social emotional considerations and really all the things we plan to do to support students and staff if and when we return to school. The sixth item, grading and assessment. Our recommendations for any of the options that we present this evening really do address grading and assessment in each capacity. And last, we're going to talk about some of the future items that we plan to discuss in the near future, as the items under this topic really are ever changing, and we hope to have more information moving forward. Current conditions. We really wanted to begin tonight's presentation kind of setting the tone for you and really providing you the opportunity to emphasize 3 primary conditions that we found to be most important for you to consider for the overall reopening of schools. The first one being that we do recommend that school begin on August 11th. Many of our students are anxious to come back in some capacity, and we do believe that that date is still an effective date that we need to consider. The second condition that we would like for you to consider and think about is the options we're going to share this evening. The options that we feel really provide every parent in this community the opportunity to make the best decision for not only themselves, but for their child. And the third decision and condition that we found most applicable is some of the details and things we're going to share this evening are still subject to the collective bargaining process. So what that means is these are still things that we need to work out the details of with our unions, but we're confident in the collaborative relationship that we've developed thus far and hopeful and know that we're going to make the right decision for our students. The reopening planning timeline. This is just an overview of where we are in the process. We've spent the last couple of weeks really listening to our community, listening to our stakeholders, gathering initial input. From there, it landed us today, really presenting you trustees with 3 ideas around reopening. And we're excited to get into the details of those this evening. Beyond that, we continue to want to gather more stakeholder engagement in the next week or 2, and you'll receive more communication about that tomorrow in our weekly update. And thus far, we will hope to have a decision for reopening in mid-July and then enable us to prepare for our reopening. We have that decision. Stakeholder engagement. As I shared before, we spent a lot of time in early June really engaging our parents. And for me, I think this was probably the most important aspect of this process. Not only did we engage live on Zoom meetings, many of us in this room with over 156 students in very deep discussions around coming back to school. We also spoke with 144 parents in focus groups. In addition to that, on our website, we provided a place where parents could submit input live daily. And we received up to and over around 1,900 responses. In addition to that, a survey went out in late May, early June that really afforded parents the opportunity to respond to how they felt remote learning was conducted in phase 2 and what they felt the needs were of our program going forward. We received over 8,973 responses. I think what was most important for our team to really use in this process and to analyze was the input that we read from the input form that came in via the web. Primarily, there were 6 large categories that came to us from our parents and stakeholders. And really those categories fell into teaching and learning, health and safety, assessment and grading, athletics, daily activities, and special education. What you see in parentheses are roughly the number of parents that commented on each of those topics. Our most passionate topic was teaching and learning, which I think many have expected to see up here this evening. Some of the points that I think stood out in those 1,043 comments were the vast majority of the people that were in favor of fully reopening. The understanding of the circumstances in spring 2020, but the desire for students to have more robust teaching and learning for the fall in any capacity we return in. Parents really gave us feedback around providing more structure and more direct instruction, whether we were in hybrid or full remote learning. And some requests were for full remote learning. The next topic that gathered the most energy was health and safety, to be expected. We want our students to return in any capacity, but we want them to return in a healthy and safe manner. There was a strong voice from the community not to be in favor of an in-person reopening due to health and safety concerns. Many parents were uncomfortable with sending their kids back to school until a vaccination was developed. The desire for students not to be comfortable with coming back into a building, not knowing what that would look like, or the expectations of cleaning and sanitizing the rooms. The need for enhanced health and safety measures was also a priority for our families. The next area that really generated a lot of energy was assessment and grading, and the desire for us to return to an A to F grading system in our secondary schools, and also to return to a standards-based report card in our TK through 5 elementary program. Athletics also was a topic that parents were quite passionate about. Reopening athletics tied to the social emotional well-being of our students and how important and vital it was for children to be able to access that. Many parents who advocated for athletics also understood that there would be modifications to meet the needs of our health and safety requirements, which you'll hear a little bit more about later on in our presentation. The next two areas that generated the most input was our daily activities. Really concerns about working parents and their ability to handle staggered or hybrid schedules. Their ability to find childcare, places to put their children midday, hybrid schedule. Many concerns about the health and safety of recess, lunch, PE, and what that would look like for their children. Special education. Many of our special education parents were passionate about students with an IEP and how they had suffered during remote learning without support. Parents' feelings that they were unable to support their students' individual needs, and really the importance of their children being back in the room with their service providers, paraeducators, and teachers. As I mentioned before at the beginning of our slide, another piece of our stakeholder engagement was the initial input survey, which was the survey that was emailed to all of our parents across the district. Two important questions were asked in that survey. The first being, knowing what you know about the COVID-19 situation, what type of learning environment would you like to see for your child when school opens in August 2020? And from that question, the following responses were generated. Roughly 45.9% of the parents wanted full-time in person, 39.7% requested a hybrid, and 14.4% requested a full remote learning option. The second question we asked dove a little bit deeper and asked, knowing what you know about the COVID-19 situation, how comfortable are you in sending your child to San Ramon Valley Unified School District physical school site on the first day of school, August 11th, 2020? 38.8% of our parents said they were comfortable. 34.1% of our parents said they were not comfortable. And 27.1% said they were very comfortable sending their child back to school. The next thing we did as an educational services team is really wanted to analyze a lot of the feedback and emails we were receiving around what schools in the surrounding districts were doing in our area. So we took the opportunity to kind of reach out personally to not only those assistant superintendents, those directors of curriculum, but really to have thoughtful conversations who were with the people in the building who were developing their district's plans. And as you can see, this slide really summarizes where several districts are and the options they're considering. And again, I say considering because these are things that they have not necessarily decided upon in all districts. And in some cases, some have made decisions to settle on that existing schedule that you see up there. This information was collected as of June 19th. And with the ever-changing county health guidelines, we know that some of these may be subjected to change as well. But we thought it was important for our parents and our community to see and to recognize that many of us are in the same boat in making the same decisions and offering the same options to their boards as we are this evening. I'd like to turn it over to my partner, Assistant Superintendent Danny Hellman, to take us through the next portion of this presentation.
Thank you, Christine. I'd like to also start off by thanking one of the committees that I was working with, the logistics committee. We had over 30 people working in 4 different working groups to come up with some of the options we're going to get to in a second. But before we do that, I wanted to be able to cover to the group and to the board, how do we decide which scenario is best for SRVUSD? In order to do that, we have to differentiate between guidance and orders. And for some of our board members, they will probably recognize the difference between guidance and orders is kind of like an education code, having the word you may do something versus you shall do something. So in education code, the may is guidance. And so guidance can come from all sorts of different organizations. And early on, the entire nation saw some guidance from the Center for Disease Control, the CDC. The California Department of Education put out some guidance about a month ago. And the county public health officer and the county superintendent have also provided guidance along the way. Guidance is strongly recommended, and in this particular situation of a pandemic, it's based on public health data. It provides more autonomy for local decision making because every local area is a little bit different. So what applies in our county may not be as applicable in, say, Southern California or in North counties that border with other states like Oregon or Nevada. An order, by comparison, must be followed. It has to be treated as law. It can also be issued by different agencies at different levels, the state or at the regional level or the county level. Could be by the governor or it could be by the director of public health or some other with the same power. In the orders case, a public health officer will intervene and or shut down schools if conditions are dangerous or the public is at risk. And that determination is made by the public health officer, and they are fully equipped to make that decision and to issue that order. So in order to determine the scenario, we have to be able to differentiate between those two, and wanted to start with that first. So now that we're done with somewhat of the current conditions, we want to move into some of the health and safety considerations. These health and safety considerations are, as Christine said, ever changing, and they are changing as of the last couple of days. So I want to jump into those and give you guys an idea of what that looks like. So the current key guidance from the Contra Costa County Public Health Officer as of June 22nd is as follows. And this is just a summary of the most recent county public health guidance. And this was issued in collaboration with our County Office of Education. And it's essentially published in 2 documents. There's an FAQ, frequently asked questions document, and there's also a school reopening guide that was published by the County Office of Education. All these orders and all the guidance that they've given us applies to all curricular, all co-curricular, and all extracurricular activities. So this is essentially the blanket guidance for everything we do with schools, whether it's in the classroom, on a ball field, or in a classroom after school because it's a club or something like that. Everything is covered. So here are some of the highlights. The latest order allows for physical distancing between 4 feet and 6 feet apart for students in a classroom setting. It provides masks and face shields for staff, that we should have those, and masks for students based on their age. Essentially, that breakdown is that it's required for students above a certain age. For us, that would be middle school and high school. And it's highly recommended for students in elementary school, starting at grades 1 up to grade 5, I believe. On top of this, from the county, in the last 2 to 3 days, the governor, as you may have seen, has issued an order that all California residents should be wearing a mask when they are in public or not around their cohort of family members in their social bubble, that they should be wearing face masks. That just came out as well. Hand washing is encouraged regularly and thoroughly. Students and staff in groups as small and as consistent as we can practically achieve. We should also limit non-essential visitors and volunteers on campus for the foreseeable future, including essentially all of next school year. Additionally, there are cleaning, disinfection, and sanitary guidelines that should be followed by all schools. We should avoid large gatherings in school settings. We need to follow public health procedures for investigating COVID-19 cases. This new collaboration between the county health and the county office of ed was very specific about what the procedures should be, and there will be more details coming from them on this so that schools know exactly what to do if there is a suspected COVID-19 case in a school classroom or on a school site. Schools should consider serving individually plated or boxed meals, and we should specifically teach and reinforce hygiene practices. One of the things that we became very aware of quickly was that COVID was going to be around for a while, and all of the guidance that we were seeing, whether it was from the locals or the state or even the national, it was coalescing around social and physical distancing strategies. It became evident that all schools would be challenged in returning to schools full-time, 5 days per week. This is a graphic that is attempting to explain the tension between these three variables. 1, physical distancing at the top. 2, the number of students in the classroom. And 3, the number of instructional time, whether that's instructional minutes per day or per week. If you imagine yourself in the middle of this triangle, as you move towards physical distancing, you move away from instructional time and the number of students. In order to fully implement physical distancing, the only real way to do that is to decrease the amount of minutes that students are face-to-face with teachers, or you have to decrease the number of students that are physically in the space. If you want to increase the number of students, that means less time. So you're gonna move towards the pink bubble in the bottom right corner. That means you're not gonna be implementing the physical distancing strategies as stringently, or you're going to be increasing or decreasing instructional time. And then lastly, if you try to increase time, you have to also limit physical distancing, or you have to limit the number of students you're interacting. The point is that these three variables with the original physical distancing guidelines was very limiting to us. In the last 2 days, we've come to have the new physical distancing for schools, which is between 4 and 6 feet. It makes this a lot easier, but there are still limitations to what we can do. And so while these three variables are not completely opposed to one another, they still are limiting our ability to return to school this fall and do business as if we have done it in the past. So given the current health and safety considerations, we now want to move into what the three options are for reopening for our district coming this fall, 2020. The three options are essentially summarized here, and we're going to go into each one in a little bit more detail. It's probably worth noting at this point that while we have these three options, in the last 24 hours, state legislature has passed a trailer bill, AB 77, that provides school districts more flexibility on topics like instructional minutes for each grade level, and has defined distance learning and how we use that for attendance. So that is fresh off the press, just happened last night. So a lot of the details and the information that I'm going to speak to here on numbers 1, 2, and 3 that the teams came up with in the last 4 or 5 weeks were all based upon no guidance from the state at that point. They've now given us that guidance. So some of these options will have to be tweaked to line up with the new guidance from the state legislature. But this work was all done. This is all done in concert together with our bargaining units, with managers, with the input that Christine went over. We put all of that into the mixer and tried to come up with something that would provide options that addresses all of the needs, all of the concerns. And there are a great set of differing needs across this district. So we're trying to capture all The bottom line here is that things at the state level are becoming more clear with regards to what options we truly have available, and we'll come back and tweak these things as necessary. That being said, let me jump into the three big options. And then one thing I'd like to say, and I'm going to keep repeating it, is that it doesn't matter which option we pick on this slide, whether it's full-time in person, hybrid in person with remote learning, or full-time remote learning. All the options, students and families can choose venture independent study or a resident school or a resident program based remote learning. That will be an option for all families if that's something, we're prepared to design that if that's something that is still wanted once the board makes a decision. So this slide here, I want to just talk very briefly about what is venture independent study and or the resident school learning and what's the difference. Well, in this slide, it kind of lays that out a little bit. Venture independent study is really students who are working independently on assignments, meeting with a certificated teacher periodically throughout the week, versus resident school program-based remote learning, where the family remains enrolled in their resident school. It has a structured remote learning with a certificated teacher. So which students are a good fit for venture? This would be a student K-12, any level, who wants to work and study remotely. These are students that work well independently and students who want to transfer to venture for at least one semester. If that doesn't sound like your student, maybe this other option will work. The resident school option is a good fit for students who want to work 100% remotely all the time. They desire a more structured learning environment, so less independent, and they want to remain at their home school. So this is an option that we are willing to develop over time, depending upon what the board's direction is. Feedback tonight and then in the future. So option number one. Option one is the one that we kind of understand the best, but it will have to be a little bit tweaked because, as I said, COVID and physical distancing has limitations. Option number one is full-time, in person, 5 days per week, 6.5 hours per day, which is about what students attend now. The maximum number of students that we can get into a classroom while maintaining 4 feet to 6 feet of distance between the students. The classrooms will most likely need to be cleared of every other furniture item to maximize the number of students. So that means we would have teacher desks and student desks. All the other stuff would have to come out. Students would more than likely be in rows facing forward. This is the county guidance. And this would allow us to return the maximum number of students full-time to classrooms. So this is a bit of a shift in our thinking. So we went out to some classrooms in our district and started to mock up what this would look like. This is a very traditional setup in a fairly standard sized room. We were able to get about 30 desks in this particular classroom, all about 4 to 6 feet apart. To be specific, we were able to get, this little diagram kind of shows it, 4 feet on center between students front to back and 5 feet on center between students side to side. See if I can get this to click over a little more. There we go. So again, the assumption here is that all desks are facing forward. All measurements are from the student seated position, not necessarily the desk itself. The county guidelines talk about the fact that physical distancing is the distance between people, not objects. Let me go back to this slide for just a second here. In this picture, we fully recognize that not all of our classrooms look like this. And so I don't want anyone to think that we did this one room and that was it. We have our teams of custodial staff who've gone through every school in the district and have taken an inventory to figure out, can we do this and replicate it everywhere? That's in process right now. These new guidelines are only a couple of days old. And so we are doing that inventory to figure out which rooms have tables, which rooms have desks, which rooms have desks and chairs that are separate. And we will have to then figure out how to pull off a system that looks a little bit more like this and a little bit like this. So that's option number one. Option number two is a hybrid in-person and remote learning option. as I mentioned before, and you're going to hear me say it again, even if the district decides to go with option 2, there is still a choice for families to stay home full-time. That's still an option. So what is option 2? What are the highlights? It's part-time in school, and it's part-time remote learning for all students. Increased rigor, more frequent virtual instruction and interaction, and improved structure for the remote learning program. So I mentioned this earlier, and this will be more concise because it's coming right off the slide instead of from my memory, but I wanted to make sure understands that these 3 sample schedules were developed with input from the surveys that Christine went over, the focus groups of parents and students, the steering committees who represented all of our different unions on probably, I'll just do a rough estimate, probably 15 to 20 hours of meeting time virtually, and our management team and labor partners, as we mentioned. I also want to reiterate that these teams didn't have any of the detailed guidance or language from the state. That came out last night. So what they came up with is specific to option 2. It's specific to the hybrid option. And we will obviously need to circle back and tweak these options now that we have a little bit more clarity from the state on what the options and what they'll allow. So that being said, let me walk through the elementary sample schedule. First, the elementary structure is as follows. The group really spent some time and wanted to make sure that grades 1 through 5 get the maximum amount of time in front of a teacher face-to-face. So given social distancing guidelines at the time, grades 1 through 5 came up with, elementary came up with grades 1 through 5 being in class Monday through Thursday, 3 hours per day. So those grades would be in class 4 days a week for 3 hours a day. Because of space considerations around TK and K classes, which already in a normal school year run a split schedule of sorts, they would be in class for an hour and a half per day, 4 days a week. For TK5, the idea behind leaving Friday open is that it would be a flexible time for a whole class meeting to be done virtually. They could have teacher collaboration, professional development on distance learning, and lesson preparation, hold IEPs, and the teachers could do intervention and hold parent meetings as well. For TKK students, there's 2 different options being floated: the same start time for all TK students and K students, or to do a slip staggered start time, which we have in effect in several of our elementary schools now. Science, PE, and music classes would be offered weekly during the student's 3-hour time slot. So those would still be possible, and we would still provide that instruction for students. Here's what a schedule would possibly look like. In the morning time, you would have essentially from 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. This would be the morning group instruction. They would be dismissed. We would provide lunches for any students who needed it. It would be a grab and go style of lunch, meaning almost like a trip lunch, where they come in, grab it, and literally go. Take it home and eat it, or have their, however they get home, they go that way and have their lunch. That would provide transition time to clean the classrooms before the afternoon groups would show up, and then give the time for the teacher to transition. The second group, the afternoon group of students, would arrive at 12 p.m. and stay till 3 p.m. The considerations here is that this facilitates greater physical distancing by having half the class come in the morning and half the class come in the afternoon. The smaller class sizes with more independent done at home, time allocated for intervention and individual services, as we mentioned on that flex day Friday or whenever the day needed to be. And it would also, well, one of the cons of this model would be considering childcare needs of the community. The committee was very aware this would cause challenges for some families who needed to drop off in the morning but have care all day long. They didn't have a solution for that out of the gate, but this was definitely highlighted, definitely noted, and we started to have conversations about it as well. In middle school, some of the structure items for middle school, they followed similar to the elementary school model. So grades 6 through 8 would be in class for 4 days per week, partial days in the morning or in the afternoon. Students would be in periods 1 through 4 on Monday, Wednesday, and periods 5 through 8 on Tuesday, Thursday. Physical education would be taught fully remote. and 1 hour in the school day would be used for cleaning, teacher prep, and lunch, similar to the elementary model. It's worth noting that there is a conversation happening at the state level that they may waive physical education requirements for this next school year. And if that were to happen, then this schedule could be adjusted as needed. Here's a sample schedule for middle school. One of the things that's worth noting in middle school is that they opted to have the flexible time on a Monday in their model, but it's very similar to the elementary model. And I'll just note right here that we would recommend as staff that no matter what the model is, if it's similar to the elementary model, we would pick the same day. So if it's going to be Mondays off for elementary, it's going to be Mondays off for middle school. It's going to be Fridays at elementary, it'll be Fridays at middle school, so that things line up for our families who have students at multiple schools, multiple levels. We recognize that that is a challenge if you had one day off here and a different day off at a different level. We wouldn't do that to you. So this is what a sample schedule middle school would look like. Here were some of the things that the committee for middle school considered. Again, students are in school 4 half days a week on a consistent basis. Students would have a schedule. They would know when to report, when to go home, and then they would know what to do when they got home. Open lunch period allowed for the cleaning and the teacher lunch, facilitates greater physical distancing, smaller class sizes, more independent work, and time allocated for intervention and individual services on that 5th day, whichever day of the week it would fall. Now we get to high school. High school is a little bit more complicated, and I will just state that this group came up with some incredibly creative ideas, about 3 or 4 actually. And the concept between the members of the high school group was they tried to come up with something that was so flexible that it could throttle from 1 day a week with students on campus all the way up to 4 days a week or down to 2, the situation with the pandemic. So that being said, I'm only highlighting one of their options here, and this particular option was the one that provided the most face time between the students and the staff. I will say before I get into this one that one of the creative options they came up with was if it was 1 or 2 days a week, that the students would come in the morning and only see certain departments. So as an example, they would meet face-to-face with PE, the Visual Performing Arts Department, World Language Department, and the Science Department. And in their concept, the English Department, Social Studies Department, and Mathematics Department will be fully remote under any circumstances other than a full 5 days a week return to quote unquote normal. So that was very innovative and interesting. It would allow for definitely some flexible scheduling, and students would be blocked kind of in chunks of 3 periods at a time. A little bit of a scheduling puzzle to put together, but definitely yielding some interesting results. This particular option that I have here on the slides is a more traditional split A-B, where students attend 2 days per week. Here, 4 departments hold all classes in person. As I mentioned, 3 departments could do it virtually. Other in-person classes could be support classes like our Algebra 1 A1 E1 course, our SEDI courses, AVID program, and any sorts of production classes like engineering, or we have a childcare program at Monte Vista, for instance. That couldn't be socially distanced and done virtually. Here's what a sample schedule would look like. Very similar to the middle and elementary models. You have students coming all day. That's a little different. Periods 1 through 6 or A through 6 if they take a 7th period. Very similar to the Bell schedule, but they're only coming twice. In this case, the first block of students would come on Monday. They would stay home on Tuesday. They would come again on Wednesday, and that's it for the A group. The B group would come on Tuesday and essentially mirror what was done on Monday with that class. So if I'm teaching economics, I would teach the same thing as a teacher twice. I would teach it to half my class on Monday and the other half on Tuesday. Then I would do something different with them Wednesday, Thursday. Again, Friday, very similar. A flex day for all sorts of things. If you did have classes that were meeting completely online and remote, you could use Friday on-site assessment day. Again, IEPs, parent meetings. You could also do RTI and interventions on this day, calling in small groups of students physically, or you could also do it remotely. There's lots of options here depending upon how much face time we want for the oldest students that we have, grades 9 through 12. I kind of already reviewed some of this. Afternoons and Fridays, flexible activities, IEPs, collaboration, blocking the students in 3 class blocks to establish cohorts, and allows for throttling, which I mentioned. In this model and all other models for elementary, middle, high school, we are recommending that if there's any sort of hybrid approach, that our special education students with IEPs, attend full-time in person. We find a way to do that, and if we have to take some extra classrooms to do it, we feel that students with IEPs should be on campus all the time. If the high school students are attending 4 days a week, IEP students should be there 4 days a week. They would match. So we want to line those up so that they're getting the in-person instruction. The third option, which is really much more straightforward and only takes a couple of slides to explain, would be a full-time remote learning from home option. All students participate in remote learning from home, as we mentioned earlier, and Christine's going to speak to this in a couple of minutes. An increased rigor, more frequent virtual instruction and interaction, and improved structure for the remote learning program. And again, as I mentioned earlier, students can choose the venture independent study version of this if they prefer to study and self-pace and go independent, or they could choose the resident school program-based remote learning, where they stick with a more structured program, they stay with their school, there's no transfer involved, they would just be remote and at home. And I'm going to turn this back over to Christine.
Great, thank you, Danny. Okay, thank you. My clicker wasn't clicking right. For the next 3 topics that I really wanted to cover for you trustees is really 3 topics that are applicable to all 3 options we presented this evening. So the first topic is curriculum and instruction. We know how to do traditional school, option 1. We know what learning looks like in the building. So really this slide speaks to option 2 and option 3. If you were to select a hybrid model, both in person and remote, or if you were to select full remote, these would be the improvements to remote learning that we know and have heard from our parents loud and clear need to happen. We need to increase the rigor and the activity that students are interacting with their teachers. It needs to be more frequent. The virtual instruction and interaction needs to be more frequent throughout the week, above and beyond the office hours that many of our teachers provided. More consistent scheduling across the courses so that students really do have the ability to interact with their teachers on a more consistent basis across the week. More structured at home schedule. So for those of the students that liked to maybe get up around 11 to start school, we'd want them to kind of go back to their traditional and start and really be going through their schedule throughout the day within that traditional timeline. And fewer technology platforms. We do realize that this was a frustration of many of our parents to be able to navigate multiple platforms within one system. So these would be improvements that we would want to consider specifically within our hybrid and our full-time remote option. As Danny mentioned earlier, in any of the options that you select this evening, 1, 2, or 3, our special education students are vital. We really want you to think about the recommendations that we are making with regards to our special education, special day programs really returning to school, whether it be 4 or 5 days a week, along with our adult transition students. That our infant program would remain the same and they would return to school as well for their services and services providers. Students with IEPs would be offered a remote learning option. If you as a parent were not comfortable with one of the options that were selected tonight, you will have the option to participate in either a venture or program-based homeschool option for you. So if your child is currently based at a school site where their SDC program lives, we would offer you the opportunity for them to have remote learning from their quote unquote homeschool. The rigor of the remote learning for individuals with students with IEPs would increase. And most importantly, we really want and have heard and know that the importance our related students, our related service providers provide our students, and the need for them really to be in front of our children, working with them daily. The next topic, social emotional considerations. Again, this is an overarching topic that we feel is really vital and important to any option you select. There we go. Social emotional supports for students is vital, and this committee really spent a lot of time. If I could have added probably 17 more slides onto this one slide, that's the amount of work and development that this group came up with to support students and staff. And really, at the premise of any option you select, we want to ensure and make sure that our students are effectively supported, that we have systems in place when and if they return back to school, despite whatever option you select, that they have people they can talk to, that there's resources for families and students and staff, and that we're mindful of the classroom activities that need to occur to support students, whether at home, in person, or hybrid. Grading and assessment. In any option that we've presented to you this evening, we feel it's crucial for grading and assessment to be in place. Whether we are looking at a full-time in person, whether we are looking at a hybrid, or whether we are looking at full remote learning, we feel it is important for you to consider our recommendation that secondary students should return back to their use of an A to F report card system, and our elementary students should return back to the traditional standards-based report card with the use of the 1 through 3 standard benchmark, along with teacher comments. We also feel that it's really important, despite the option we select, that we assess all students at the beginning of the year. Many of our students benefited greatly from remote learning, and many of our students suffered learning loss. So we want to make sure, whether we are in person, full-time, hybrid, or remote learning full-time, that we are assessing all of our students for what they're walking in the building with. As Rick mentioned earlier, there's several items in this presentation that we are going to discuss in the near future, and partially that's the ever-changing information that we're receiving. Physical education, the potential for a state waiver. We're still waiting and seeing if a state waiver will come into play. That can drastically shift our plans in any of the 3 options that were presented this evening. Lunch, grab and go. This can also be impacted. Changes can occur based on the ever-changing requirements and guidance that comes to us. Recess and passing periods, we're thinking through. We really are looking at what option is selected, and we want to be very thoughtful within that option to make sure that we plan appropriately for recess and passing periods. Transportation. More orders and guidelines are to come around how we transport our students safely around this campus, around our campuses. And last but not least, athletics. The California Interscholastic Federation had plans to have a decision on July 20th, where we'll get some more information around our athletics and how that's impacted in the options that we presented to you this evening. Next steps. Tonight, you kind of heard our 3 options that we wanted to recommend to you around the reopening of school. That being said, we know it's really important for our stakeholders and for you as trustees to hear the voice of our community and what they're thinking and how they're feeling around the options we presented this evening. So a couple things are coming up in the next week or 2. The first one I wanted to note is our second round of focus groups. Originally, they were planned for the early part of next week, but we have since moved them to July 2nd, and I wanted to note that new date. That's another round of groups where we interact with parents around their feedback, ideas, and thoughts around what we presented this evening. And more information on how to sign up for those focus groups is going to come out in our weekly update tomorrow. The second thing on here that we feel is important for our stakeholders to know is our surveying parents and having another opportunity to get their feedback on the options we presented this evening. And the survey will be going out to families and will be open till June 29th. And that survey should be going out this week. The third and final thing that we think is important for our stakeholders to give us feedback on is really the links to the survey, continuing to go to that Reopening Together website to provide your feedback on our ongoing form, to sign up for focus groups if you have a desire to have your input be heard. And if for some reason you are not selected for a focus group, because we do randomly select, please go to our website and know that you're able to provide your feedback there. We will be sending a revised input form tomorrow. Again, that will be going out to gather more information from our stakeholders. That being said, we'd like to open it up to the board to ask us questions about tonight's presentation. I'm very appreciative that our entire educational services team is here with us this evening, and many of them led much of the work that you saw tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and open it up for questions, and if there's a specific person that's going to answer it better, we're going to invite them up to join us.
Thank you. So open up for board comments, questions, discussion. Who would like to start off? Don't all rush at once. Mark.
I can start. Just millions of questions popping up. I'll try, and hopefully my questions will generate some further comments or questions from the rest of you. But I'll try and start at the highest level. And again, I'm going to start with questions, because I would like to spend some time to develop how I'm thinking about all this and how I'm processing all this, given all the community feedback we've all received. But let me hold off on that, because I do want to ask a little bit more granular questions, starting from the highest level. Christine, do you and your group see a pathway to offering a full-time and a hybrid 2 days, 3 days, whatever it is model, or are those mutually exclusive given the complexities of logistics in offering both?
I do believe our group is prepared to open both models. And we've had a lot of conversation up and down this Tri-Valley, regionally and throughout the state, about how that's being done. So I do believe it's feasible. It absolutely is. And a lot of our steering committee work has been directed, aiming into some of those specifics. But obviously, based on the direction that we get this evening, we're going to have to dive a little bit deeper and really kind of spell out whatever is selected in I think, more finite detail.
Yeah, I'll just say, just intuitively, from my perspective.
No.
Okay, there we go. Clarification, Mark.
Not simultaneously, but the hybrid model is a half in person, half remote. What I do believe we simultaneously are able to offer is, if you are a parent who wants your student to have more of a full remote option and you do not want your child to come to school for part of that hybrid model, you'd be able to access through Venture or a full-time remote option that would be offered at the school site, the resident home site.
Yeah, kind of see it as 4 options, right? Full-time, hybrid, remote, and a venture model.
Yes.
Sort of, I'm processing in my mind. But I just want to be super clear, because this is the one thing that's confused me, because again, board member, I'm not a logistics guy, trying to understand the granular logistics of offering full-time and a hybrid model to those students who want to be on campus part-time to get teacher face time, but also want the social distancing aspect of this. Are the logistics there, do we think, to offer both of those models at the same time? And just very simply, the reason I ask is, intuitively, if you're offering full-time, that means your teachers are at capacity. How do you also offer remote learning in a full-time environment? So
Mark, I'm gonna try to point back to slide 18. Somebody wants to put that back up, where the big 3 options are there. And so option 1 is full-time in person. Option 2 is hybrid. We don't see a pathway, either financially, contractually, to do both of those at the same time.
Okay, that's what I want to get clarity on. Okay.
Yeah. So what we are saying is you can pair 1 and 3, and you can pair 2 and 3, but not 1 and 2. Can
right.
never be paired together.
Thank you. That's what I just want to get clarity on, because I couldn't see a path, but again, I haven't studied it and want to make sure that the folks who are studying it are guiding me. Second thing, again, high level, and please don't let me monopolize, guys, is full-time. Can you talk about how we've been thinking about safety. I'm thinking about PPE. I'm thinking about sanitation. I'm thinking about distancing between class time. I'm thinking about how do you do cohorts at a high school level? Because cohorts are one of the guidance principles put forth by Contra Costa County. Can you talk to me a little bit about that? And maybe Greg can provide a little bit of commentary around budgeting for these increased expenditures and hopefully what we might be able to see from California.
Absolutely. So one of the groups within the logistics group was focused on safety. And so protective personal equipment, what kind do we need? Who needs it? How often do they need it? Was definitely a topic of discussion. How often are we doing things like washing of hands at all the different levels? And how do we create cohorts at primarily secondary, but primarily, you know, high school with sometimes you have individual classes, there's only one section of it. You don't have, you know, 4 sections of AP Chinese as an example, you only have 1 or 2 maybe. So how do we do that is a scheduling puzzle. It's incredibly complex, but that's why one of the solutions that the high school team came up with is that if some of the classes were fully remote, in person, then you have a little bit more leeway with how you bring students back on campus while maintaining the 6 feet of social distancing. Now with the 4 feet, we can rethink a little bit, and we might be able to use some spaces that we currently don't use as a classroom. We're going to have to get creative. We're going to have to think about NPRs and gyms and commons and libraries and things like that in order to get as many students in person and yet meet the guidelines. So as Christine said, there's still a lot of work to do to figure out the details, but conceptually, this is where we are now. And there's more work to be done once we get an idea of which direction we're going. And I think that the guidance from, it's not guidance, but the new language from the trailer bill is incredibly helpful because now we know what the new minimum instructional minutes will be by grade level. We have a place to start. Most of the work we've been doing thus far has been, let's build something that makes sense for most things, absent that detailed line. So now that we have it, we can kind of meld it together and see where it leaves us.
So one other finer point to Danny's good description of all these complex topics is until the language that came our way today on the trailer bill, the hybrid versions that many districts have been proposing were not yet even legal because they were reduced instructional minutes. So again, that's why I'm so proud of our trustees and our community for understanding that time matters here and that as things begin to become more clear, we can begin to answer your questions, trustees, as well as our community's questions.
Yeah, and not to get into a discussion of budget at all, but Greg, maybe just a little bit background for us on how this might be financed, given new monies from Sacramento.
He'll be up to the mic in about 10 seconds.
The state announced a budget compromise on Monday, and details are still trickling out as of today, but we expect that at least some part of the state's allocation will directly involve COVID relief and specifically personal protective equipment, PPE. So some of the early headlines are that there may be an allocation as high as $165 per student for COVID relief and PPE. So we'll await those details.
Okay. I can keep going. So you guys stop me as soon as you want me to.
Keep going, Mark.
Going back to the high school slide, Greg, I really want to drill down on the concept of, on the hybrid model. Again, English, math, social sciences, I think were the 3 that you presented as full remote. And the idea and the policy behind those particular 3 and why that's a better idea as opposed to a half day block days that have been proposed, other proposals that have come from the community. This one's creative, but I haven't seen it. I haven't focused on this one before.
Yeah, this one, it's incredibly creative and again, it could be 1 day a week where students are coming. It could be applied 2 days a week where students are coming. And again, it was about the throttling. And the reason that those particular departments were chosen by the committee, I believe, had to do with the fact that it's difficult to do band class remotely. It's a lot easier to do that in art in person. PE the same. Lab science is another one. World language is really based on speaking and listening, and you need to be present to do that in a more efficient way. So I think that's the reason why they focused on those. It's not to say that there's benefit to English and social studies and math being in person. I don't think they were saying that at all. I think they were saying there's 8 departments to choose from. If we have to be limited, what would be an option? What would be best? And so they came up with that as a flexible approach, but there would have to be exceptions because you have a lot, as you know, a lot of AP classes at the high school level that need to meet. The AP classes are very structured around assessments. 1 day a week for, AP geography to meet or something may not be enough. So there's going to have to be one-off exceptions, but as a general structure to provide flexibility, it made sense on paper to start to flesh it out. It may not hold water once we get a little further into it, especially once we apply the instructional minutes for grades 9 through 12. We may not be able to do that at all, and we might have to go to a 4x4 block approach or a blocking 3 in the morning. Or so, again, it was a good idea with the information we had at the time, and so we now have to figure out if it's going to work for all of our students. So that's kind of what they were thinking, I believe, if I'm representing them correctly.
Any other questions, Mark?
Last set of questions, then I will see it. I don't want to monopolize. If we go to the one slide on the remote, full remote learning, there are what I call pillars, and I'll explain this later in my commentary. Does the district have any more detail around how we're going to provide more rigor, how we're going to provide more structure at home, how we're going to provide more efficacy in assessments? If you look at those 5 or 6 pillars, what I call them, have we fleshed out the detail behind those yet, or is that still a work in progress?
So I can speak to that a little bit, Mark. We have talked quite a bit about that because with any of these scenarios, we invariably will have some people learning from home. Or of course, there's a talk of if there's a resurgence and if all schools have to close. And so we have talked quite a bit about that. In terms of increased rigor, we've talked about either having teachers get together and create really rigorous and robust Google Classrooms where they're all contributing. So they divvy up the work and, this department creates these lectures and activities, and then that department creates another set. And so all teachers from around the district have a really strong repository of resources to pull from where students will get the direct instruction, possibly live, possibly recorded. Another thing that we've talked about is potentially for the remote teaching and learning, maybe we look at outside online curriculum. And so I know we've used Edgenuity in the past. There's a class for high school students or classes for high school students that the UCs have made free for the next year, and they're called UC Scout. And so we really want to investigate how can we kind of across our schools either create or maybe purchase, though UC Scout is free, one curriculum that is extremely robust that all students can really benefit from. In terms of we heard loud and clear from families, and I get it, based on that initial survey that we did, that students need a schedule, right? They need a purpose up at 8:30 every morning. And so some of the ideas our group had was that teachers could start out every single period with either, maybe a class meeting that goes over the daily expectations or the weekly expectations, and then potentially end with a class meeting. And in between, you're having students potentially do some independent work or teachers working one-on-one or one to small groups with students on particular knowledge and skills. And so we talked a lot about different options, but of course we've really not settled on anything, but I think we're headed in a really productive direction.
Thanks, Deb. Sorry, I did have one last one. Follow-on survey, is that open now?
No, the survey is going apologize for that. The survey is going out tomorrow. So we have surveys for parents, for students in grade 6 through 12, and then also for all of our teachers based on this presentation. So
Can
it'll be
we-
going out.
Can we
I'm
keep
sorry.
that open longer than next Monday? I really think it's important now that we have really robust community engagement and involvement in this discussion, in these debates, to get a really good cross-sectional view of where our families are. I'm not discounting for a survey, but I think if we do this and we open it up just a little longer, it's my own personal view, we might get a much more rigorous and robust response.
We can absolutely do that. Yes, absolutely. And I am sure many families are on vacation, so that makes perfect sense.
Okay, thank you. Again, I will come back. I am nowhere near done, but I don't want to monopolize.
Who's next? Who'd like to go next?
I'll ask a couple of questions. Oh, go
Okay,
ahead,
go ahead,
Susanna.
Ken.
No, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, I just have a couple to start with. If you can hear me okay, because I know there's some
Yes.
issues.
can hear you.
Okay, good. I guess one question is, if we were to go to 5-day a week in school or even a hybrid, how prepared are we planning to be able to, on a dime, move to full remote if the virus situation were to shift? Because as we've seen, things are shifting very, very quickly.
I'll field that one, and others may have some other things to say. We've been talking about that for weeks now. So I think, as you're already aware of the three options, the most complex and difficult to navigate is hybrid. The remote learning, we can do pretty well, and hopefully better than we did in the spring. And then the full-time is full-time, and that's what we do. So I think pivoting back to remote learning is easy to do in terms of communicating that, because we'll go back to what we would hope would be the stronger version of spring 2020. So we believe we can do it right away. If we get an order on a Monday, we can be 2 or 3 days later, remote learning. We've already done that. So we're prepared for that. We anticipate that. In fact, we're going to be required to be able to do that based on the state regulations at this time.
And Rick, I appreciate that answer. And at the same time, you know, from the input we were getting from the spring and recognizing we want to do it with a whole lot more rigor, it wasn't consistent. And so maybe you can talk a little bit more about what the plans would be for the level of consistency and a little bit more maybe about the structure of any level of remote learning different from what we saw in the springtime.
Sure, I can take that one. Yes, absolutely. We agree with you 100%, of course. Some of the things that we have looked at in terms of increased consistency, and I'll kind of go back to my last answer. But if you set up a Google Classroom, but you really set up what, so for example, a 9th grade Algebra 1 class, really what week 1 would entail, right? So what do the all group meetings look like? What do those small group interactions? What essential standards should they be focusing on? What do the end of course or end of class assessments? What do those look like? And really build them consistently across either the grade levels or the courses at the secondary level. And so again, that it's really creating a more consistent curriculum, whether that's created by our teachers or potentially by an outside entity and then used by our teachers in some form. I mean, both Edgenuity and UC Scout, for example, require, you have to have a certificated teacher in that particular subject area teach those courses. They just have kind of robust materials online.
And I would also like to add at the elementary level, I think where we would want to add more support and where we heard the most feedback was around that live teaching, actually using the time in front of the camera with a primary teacher or an upper elementary teacher to actually be instructing children and not necessarily maybe as many opportunities to ask questions or to troubleshoot an assignment that was maybe given. Really using that time throughout the week with a teacher for some live teaching and for it to be more consistent and robust and really scheduled.
And if I could add on to that, especially the scheduling part, Christine, is really the need to take attendance. So that student's going to have to get up at 8:30 in the morning to attend that first period class. And I do think that's in the new rules and regulations, a component of taking attendance each and every day for each period. And I think that's going to be vital.
Yeah, Deb, I appreciate you mentioning it last part, because that level of structure, I think, is one of the things that people are really concerned about with virtual learning, is to ensure that the kids actually are there. You know, when they're in a classroom and you can look at them, if someone's dozing off or looking away, you know, you can get that kind of feedback right away. If they step away from the screen, you don't know if they're still in the room or not. And so I think, you know, it starts with taking attendance, but making sure the interaction is clear and the expectations are set in terms of you are in school, even if you're not physically in a classroom.
Yes, I think one of the reasons, Ken, and I appreciate this line of questioning, for the new regulations which just landed, and we haven't analyzed them deeply from the state of California, is the universal feedback around the state, and likely around the nation, was nobody was happy with the remote learning from spring 2020. So I think that drove some of the stricter regulations around attendance and seat time.
Mm-hmm.
And things like that.
I would just add, from some of the things that we did get, we have some exceptional teachers that did a tremendous job during the springtime. I've heard stories of how they were engaged with their students and kept up morale with their students and really provide the academic environment that we would like to see across the board. So there was quite a bit of that going on. It's how do you make it consistent across the entire and provide the kind of rigor across the entire system that our communities come to expect. Just let me ask one more question before I turn it over to others, and then we can keep circling around. It has to do with health and safety, particularly with the hybrid model. You know, when we first started out, first with power shutoff issues, when we were blacking out schools, and then when the COVID was first starting out, the expectation was the safest place for kids to be was in school. That if they weren't in school, we kind of lose track of them. But with the COVID, and particularly with the hybrid, with the kids coming and going, how do we ensure that we're not providing for more social distance interaction than we want? You know, how do we ensure that that the health and safety of the kids in a hybrid environment is going to match either them keeping home all the time or under our tutelage at school?
I think the key answer to that is about what we do with the students when they're on our campus. And so if you're talking about elementary students, we have to schedule in the time where they're washing their hands. We have to take the time at that midday split before the PM group gets there, that we are cleaning and sanitizing the spaces where kids just work before the new set of kids comes in. So it's those kinds of things that we only see them either partial days or a couple of days a week. And when we do see them, we're going to have to ensure that we're taking all of those precautions. It includes things like when students come to school, if it looks as though we have a procedure in place for those students that look as though they may be having some sort of symptoms that are related to fever. What do we do? Well, we already have plans in our list to figure out essentially a sick room for students that might be showing symptoms, but then a sick room for the student who's healthy, who bumped their knee and needs a Band-Aid. Those are the kinds of procedures that we need to have in place. And we've already started talking about them in our safety working group within the logistics committee, to have all of those things in place before the school year starts, so that we ensure that we've got procedures that if something does occur with, for lack of a better term, an outbreak or a spike in cases, and county health calls us, we can respond with, this is what we know, this is the cohort that student's in, here is the reporting information, and we can work very quickly so they can ascertain what we should do next. So I think that's where the devil in the detail will come around that topic.
I'll turn it over to others for more questions at this point. Thank you.
Okay, Susanna, you had your hand up earlier.
Yeah, yes, lots of questions. Same thing, I don't even know where to start, but let's start with just a couple of clarifications. So for in-person, right? I just wanted to clarify because we're at the very, very beginning, we were talking about what's our guidance and what's our required, right? Directives or whatever. So for in-person, face masks and things like that for kids. And I know it's different, right? Elementary, middle, and high school. So, and I would think that for staff, it would have to be required. But for elementary students, as I understand, anyone under 12, you know, is more of a encouragement. But then for middle school and high school, right, it is required to have face masks. Is that, did I get that?
Yes,
Okay.
that's accurate. So in the guidance that they put out, students 12 years of age and older are required, bold and underlined in the guidance from the County Office of Ed, to wear face coverings at school. Students 3 to 11 are strongly encouraged to wear a face covering, particularly when they are indoors. So we translated that, since we have some 11-year-olds in 6th grade, we would do all of middle school as a requirement, and grades 1 through 5 would be strongly encouraged, with an exemption for the smallest, youngest of our students at the TKK, I think is an exception they make here.
Okay.
Under 3, that's what it was. Sorry, not grade level, but under age 3.
Right. Okay. I also want to clarify venture classes, because from what I remember from venture classes, right, a student would meet with their teacher like once a week, but sometimes they'll go in and there'll be small group classes. In this scenario, it sounds like the small group part won't be part of venture, and it's really just kind of almost independent study, but remote, except for the once a week or however many times the student would see a teacher. Is that correct?
That's a great question, Susanna. Venture has traditionally been serving our upper grade students, right? Our 6th through 12th grade students. So traditionally, yes, you are correct. That small group learning is not necessarily happening as frequently as we would like it to be. It really is the teacher meeting with the student independently once or twice a week. That being said, introducing elementary school students to a venture option, I do believe that, and Debbie Pettish and I have had a lot of conversation around this with her subgroup committees, we would explore further options to increase what that model might look like to support our students more frequently K-5. And I can let Debbie talk a little bit more about that, but I do agree with you. I think that would be something we would need to consider re-looking at through venture.
Yes, and Trustee Ordway, we did have Rose Bright, who is of course the principal of our alternative education program, including venture, on our subcommittee, and she was wonderful. We talked a lot about, you know, if there is an influx of students into the program, what could it look like? And so we do want to make a distinction that, you know, the alternative ed program or venture is independent study, which would be, of course, different than if a student chose remote learning through their homeschool. But there, you know, there's some advantages to it. And in the survey tomorrow, we have a link to some additional information. And we had talked to Rose as well about maybe providing some type of Zoom or webinar to really explain, because Rose has made some amazing changes to venture. And students, of course, have a case manager who really kind of works one-on-one to build their schedule and to meet with them to ensure that they're making progress in their classes. And some of the classes at the secondary level are like whole group classes, or the teacher might meet with small groups periodically throughout the week. And so the great thing about venture is it's so personalized to the students that it's almost difficult, it almost makes it difficult to describe, but we will do our best to do so.
Okay. Thank you. I just want to make sure that, you know, from what I remember from venture, that it's, still holds for, or maybe it's changed because of, what we're doing with the reopening. Also, I think I missed when you were answering Ken's question about remote and the use of cameras. Are you considering using cameras in the classroom? Because I thought I heard that, but then I kind of missed it, and I knew that there was some conversation, right? Because some of the other school districts were considering use of cameras in their classrooms, just so that you can keep that particular lesson consistent throughout. So did I miss something, or maybe?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you for that clarification. No, at this time we are not considering cameras per se. We're recommending that teachers would increase their FaceTime via Zoom, via Google Hangout.
Okay.
Many of our teachers, did record lessons and provide that to their students, but really still providing teachers that flexibility in how they interact with the student. But we do and would like to see an increase of that interaction, and that interaction actually be live teaching versus maybe office hours or a review of an assignment.
Right. Okay, thank you. And then still on the hybrid, I know for teachers, for the hybrid model, because we're asking right, teachers to both teach in person and remote. Will teachers take on, the same teachers take on both, or are we looking at, let's say, teachers who were amazing during the spring and or would like to continue doing remote teaching? Are we asking them to do that? So that's kind of like splitting the responsibilities for in class and remote, or is it the same teacher, so they would be asked to do both?
That's a great question. I think for consistency and to really honor, I think, the relationships and that social emotional component that's so important to students, our hybrid model is really recommending that the same teacher serve that group of students both in remote learning and in in-person learning. That being said, if a parent did not select a hybrid model and maybe selected to have their student fully remote learn from home via their residence school, that may shift in the fact that they have the same teacher, but they may have multiple grade levels of students in a classroom with them, 1 or 2 grade levels, depending upon the number of parents that are receptive to that option. But the actual hybrid model would be the same teacher with the same student.
Okay, I just wanted to again clarify that. And just one more for now. So if I'm a parent or student, depending on my, I choose one, one model for beginning. And can I, not because of anything, COVID or any environmental changes that requires me to change, but if I start off, let's say, with a hybrid or a in class, can I switch if I find that I want something different, or to venture, or how easily can parent or student switch?
We've talked a lot about this, and we obviously want to provide as many options to our families as possible, because we know this is ever changing, and we know decisions for how you want to educate your children could change within your own household. I live it daily. I completely understand that. We absolutely would want to afford those opportunities. I think that being said, everything is subject to enrollment and what the capacity is at the school site, the capacity is at venture at that time, in that moment in time. But we do want to afford our families the opportunity to have that those options to flex throughout the year. But again, just like regular school year, everything is subject to the amount of kids we're able to have in a given time.
Okay, thank you. And I think, yeah, I mean, I think, when I first looked at this, right, like how do we even make a good decision without actually it's chicken or the eggs, like in order to know how many students or family want a particular, right, or how many teachers, you know, are going to be in each model, you know, how do we, you know, make that decision? So I just, yeah, wanted to kind of clarify some of these, yeah, points and also whether or not, you know, students and families can switch. But thank you for, yeah, enrollment numbers is a consideration, of course.
So just Ordway, this is Rick, just on your last comment there, as you were kind of wrapping that up, I think the idea is if we make a decision in the middle of July, we'll have to master schedule for a month to get this right. And it is complicated, but we know how to do that. It's going to be different than we've ever done before. And the reason, again, folks haven't made decisions other than the facts keep changing is the hybrid models are complex for lots of different reasons, including honoring contracts and collective bargaining and working conditions and getting kids all the right supports they need. It's all over the place. And so I think after we analyze further the latest information from Sacramento and the guidelines, it might be easier to create more options for kids in the hybrid model, but it never will be simple. So we'll be building master schedules in July and early August that typically are built in April and May. And that's a universal problem around the country. The most complex models are hybrid, fairly simple to build 5 days a week models full-time, and remote models. Those are fairly easy because we have templates and know generally how to do that.
Okay, one more question then. Given that, and I know that we started off with, you know, August 11 opening is when we're opening. With making a decision on mid-July, you think that we will still be ready for any of these models, you know, and deliver something, especially remote, right? Because we want to improve on that. We'll be ready to do all this in August.
So the remote is easy to build, even though we have work to do in terms of increasing kind of the rigor and making it more robust. We've been working on that for months. As I said, full-time is basically built, and the only challenge will be master scheduling. But we don't have any choice. We'll have to do it. There are districts, including our own county, that start in 3 weeks. East County districts and Contra Costa County start in 3 weeks, and they haven't answered any of these questions yet, as an example. The hybrid model is more complicated, but we will do it and work through whatever challenges we have. The problem, as I mentioned in my introduction, and has come up as well, if we make a decision sooner than mid-July, there's a great chance we'll have to make multiple decisions and change it. So what I'd rather spend the next 3 weeks is gathering more input. Just peeking a few minutes ago that we have nearly 2,000 people watching tonight. Our community is engaged. They do care. They have really paid attention for months now. Give them a chance to give us more feedback because we have a new option tonight. This 5-day-a-week potential option that we haven't really discussed much about what that looks like, but to get a chance for the community to weigh in on all the new information that they are hearing tonight, and likely within the next week or so, we'll be able to really analyze the new order from the state in terms of the guidelines around instructional minutes and all those options, and to continue to provide information. So yes, I believe mid-July is the best optimal time to make a decision and ultimately give staff, parents, kids, and our community a chance to really get ready for August 11th.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, no, I actually appreciate because we have and I've had so many conversations with all different types of stakeholders and information is in flux. So I actually am appreciative that you're taking kind of a more thorough approach, as well as the second, right, survey out to parents and students and staff. So thanks. Okay, I'll let someone else.
Okay.
Just to quickly follow up on that, because what we're hearing, and it's not a criticism, it's just where we are in the process, is under either any three or any of four of these approaches, there are enormous amounts of complex logistics that need to be fleshed out. And I keep using the word logistics, I don't have a better word for it. How do we develop cohorts at the high school, middle school level? How are we going to move kids around? Even on a full time, how are we going to station sanitation devices? How are we going to implement rigorous hand washing? How are we going to implement protocols to make sure kids are wearing their masks every day? There's an enormous amount of complex logistics that need to be fleshed out, and just want to see, following up on Susanna, do we have the capacity to continue to flesh these out while we're continuously getting feedback on which of the options we actually want to pursue?
Yeah. So Mark, that's a good question. So we have been working on this since April. And so we're in a really strong place, and Danny Hillman can weigh in on all the work he's done with PPE and the teams and the hygiene, and almost any scenario I see, at least opening, if the conditions in the environment and the laws don't change, we're going to have kids in classrooms and teachers in classrooms and aides in classrooms and custodians in buildings. We're going to have that. So whether it's full-time, part-time, we're prepared for that. So I think we have systems in place. We've been planning for all this now for months. And we will be able to reopen, whether it's full-time 5 days a week, the buildings need to be cleaned, or whether it's part-time, AB, AM, PM kind of schedule. So we've been working on it. I believe all of those health and safety things will be good. The areas that are going to be the most challenging will be the complexity around, if hybrid is something we do, how to get that going. We've been working on options, we've been working on planning. Doing those things is doable. It's not like we're going to decide on July 14th, let's get started on this. We've been working on it for months. Danny, anything to add?
I would just say one thing, and that's that under any of the situations, the options, pardon me, the PPE is the same. We need it no matter what. And so there are things like that. That's one example that we've already started. We've pushed play on that. Other items that I won't take time right now, but those are the kinds of things we don't need to wait for an option to determine what needs to be done around that topic. So we've already launched that. So in the meantime, it's really going to come down to, I think that the work is, and speaking to Christine and her team, really around what's the online component of this, because you need that online component. Even if we're in a full 5-day week setting, a lot of teachers use an online component. So we would have that, they use it for homework, they use it for other things, especially at the secondary level. So I think that that's really where a lot of the time is going to get spent. The logistics piece of it is the same no matter what. The lunch, the transportation, the sanitation, the PPE, that's already underway.
Okay, Rachel.
Okay, so Danny, I want to start with where you just left off with the online component, because it seemed like one of the complaints that we heard from many folks who were frustrated with the remote learning of the spring was the learning management system. And am I correct in understanding that we're going to need that regardless, because we have to be ready for if we get quarantined again?
I believe so. Every conversation that we've had as a team, it's we need a learning management system, an LMS sometimes called. We need one of those to be the single system that we use, because along with the feedback that you've heard, we've heard, can we please have one place to go? Can we not have 3 and 4 places to go? So we're trying to streamline that so that families know what's going on, students know what's going on, and that work has been happening behind the scenes.
Okay, and it might be one thing for elementary, but another thing for secondary, correct?
I think it's going to be grade specific, yes.
Okay.
So it might be a single point of entry for all students, but then from there, the resources are based upon the level, but we haven't determined that yet.
Okay, because to me, that is one of the fundamental pillars that Mark was getting at, is that the remote has to be robust, because it may end up being for everybody at some point in the year, and we need it to switch over seamlessly. I heard from several people, and I'm sure other board members did too, with very positive feedback about whatever Carondelet and De La Salle chose. So I've heard you guys mention Ingenuity a couple of times, and then Deb mentioned one from UC Berkeley, but I hope you'll look at the one from that the Catholic high schools used, because people were raving about that. So if you could just take a look at it. Before I ask any more questions, I want to compliment staff on this presentation. This was far more detail and rigor of a presentation and depth of options than I was expecting to receive. So I just want to acknowledge that, and because I know it was a lot of work from a lot of people's parts and a lot of moving pieces. With the new guidelines coming out from our county related to the possibility of full-time, which I never expected would happen in this time frame, I am kind of leaning towards, as I look at what you've presented with hybrid and what you've presented at full-time, is it almost seems like it would be easier for you to control the cohorts, even though they might be twice as big. It seems like they would be easier to get your arms around, and in terms of social distancing within that group. So if the 4 foot to 6 foot requirement is doable, I am really starting to lean towards that is a better option. It's certainly a better option for all the folks we've heard from with childcare concerns and with not being able to sit with their kids at home to do half of their learning remotely. I've also gotten the feeling from many of the emails that I read that some kids might be running a little bit loose on those days off. And that goes back to the idea that they're really better off at school, where we know where they are and we know they're 4 feet apart and we know they're washing their hands every hour or whatever. So if you're looking for some direction between 1 and 2, I am very pleasantly surprised to say I think that the number 1 option really might be safer. The idea of being able to clean every classroom in an elementary school in a 1 hour period while the teachers are having their duty-free break. So I mean, I don't see how that happens. Custodians work all day. They don't work for just 1 hour. So and obviously I know they'd be cleaning the rest of school and other parts of the day, but it's just that element of the hybrid was very concerning to me. And also the expectations of the rigor of the remote piece while a teacher is teaching the other half of the class. That part really seems like it's hard to commit to. I get the Friday part because they'd be doing live instruction, but the what the children would be doing during their time working from home, learning from home, seems very challenging. But I do have to say those sample schedules were quite creative, and clearly you guys thought through a lot of things. But I think this 11th hour news about that 5 days a week might be possible really is a gift, and I hope we can pursue that further. I'm trying to see if I had any
Rachel,
other
can I, if
questions.
it's okay, I'd like to comment on something I think that might be kind of the essence of where the conversation heads. Is it okay if I kind of
Yeah,
weigh
I
in
just
on-
wanted to interject one thing though. I think, because I read the draft from the county, I think it's really important for the many of the people who are advocating for 5 days to understand that it is a much more controlled 5 days than what we're used to. And you guys have already touched on it with the masks, but
Yeah.
there were other aspects to it too. So go ahead and say what you're going to say.
Now, you actually got me to think of something I wish I would have already said. So thank you for really looking at what 15 kids in a classroom may look like versus 30, and what the role and responsibility of our teaching staff and our aides is. So this goes back to multiple conversations with our public health officers, and I want to celebrate them, especially that we not only have 2,000 people watching, they've been under immense pressure. Their lives have been threatened. Some are under armed guard. Some of their houses have been attacked, including our own county. I just want to give a shout out to them and for their work. And their work from the beginning is, how can we support schools? How can we help kids? How can we balance moms and dads' needs to go to work and be able to take care of your kids? So shout out to our county public health folks. Density is a risk factor, Rachel. That's a quote from our public health officer on yesterday's weekly meeting.
Okay.
Density is a risk factor. However, the real challenges that we face when kids come back, whether there's 15 kids in a class or 30, isn't really about how many kids are in the class from everything we know about behavior, whether it's 6-year-olds or middle school kids or teenagers in a high school setting. It's on the way to school, it's on the way home from school. It is recess, it is lunch, it is PE, it is passing time. That's real. I think the structure that staff is able to provide in a classroom, especially under this rigorous and controlled environment, there isn't much difference in these conversations with health officers. And I think that's one of the reasons they really work to try and balance science and need and interest. And that 4 feet works. Is there a real difference between 4 feet, 8 feet, 10 feet? Many believe there is not. The science, quote unquote, from our public health officer last Monday was, it's thin. The science is thin. And also what the public health officers have said on the record is that in spite of all the death, in spite of all the tragedy, the evidence around kids is emerging that if they become infected and if they contract the virus, they tend to recover fully and quickly. So again, to kind of summarize, I think what you were kind of capturing, Rachel, is that there is a really healthy part of the conversation now that we have these 4 foot to 6 foot guidance to put more kids in there. There may not be much difference between 15 kids or 30 kids.
Rachel, any more questions? Oh,
Yeah, I'm sorry, I lost that one. Related to some of the electives, it sounded like in those county guidelines that things like wind instruments and choral singing was going to be problematic. I mean, obviously your teams are going to get into all of that, but it made me question some of the choices in the hybrid for high school. Just related, because I think our parents and many of the students we heard from are going to be a little worried about their English and their math and their social studies being only remote. If there's a PE waiver, what does that mean? And will kids still be allowed to take PE? Or I mean, so there's lots of questions there, but you guys are on it. And oh, I know what it was. It was about the cohorts. Another thing in the guidance was that they were advising that you'd have a group of kids that stayed in the same classroom and the teachers rotated to them rather than the kids moving around. And I wondered, Danny, how much your teams had looked at that.
There was definitely some conversation about that, and I think that it's we're going to bring it back. I think they went the different direction that they did, and so with the guidance now, I think if we revisit it as a team and we look at it with a different lens, this new lens, we can probably pull off something like, I'm throwing this out there and haven't vetted it yet, but maybe the class stays put and the English teacher leaves, social study teacher comes in, math teacher comes in. That might be possible. We have to work out some other things for getting the kids up and moving as well. So
right.
we'll work on something that meets the new guidelines.
So the convenient thing about that is your master schedule might actually create your cohorts for you by the kids that have the most common schedules, right? It's
true. I have to say, from having done, I've really assisted with the master schedule. I didn't do it myself. That's somebody else who I'll give credit to later. But it's incredibly complex because there's so many permutations of what a schedule looks like. And the minute you introduce what we call singleton classes, there's only one class of yearbook. There's only one class of newspaper, let's say. When you get those classes in a school, it really starts to constrict things. And so there's other limiters on a schedule that I won't go into right now, but yes, in theory, it would do that on the offset. So a freshman schedule is much more much more similar to across the whole grade level than it is, say, when you get to be a senior and there's more choice and more electives and things like that. So I think there are some possibilities that we can capitalize on this guidance with the types of courses that our students are taking. And like you've already pointed out, if something like a PE waiver comes or some other big decision from an agency like CDE or the legislature, that changes the game and what we can do as well.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions, Rachel?
Oh, I had one more, and it relates to what Mark asked in the very beginning. I'm curious how the remote option that's tied to a school site works. Do you have a dedicated teacher or 2 or 3, depending on the interest for those kids? And would they be teaching, I think someone mentioned multiple grade levels, and is that realistic for our teachers?
Yes, thank you, Trustee Hurd. We have thought a lot about this, and the way that the remote resident learning option would work is in the near future here, we would actually survey our parents, and much like we do in our annual update, and really get a commitment from our families around what option they are vying for to begin the school year. Based off that feedback, much like Mr. Schmidt shared earlier, we build our master schedule, TK through 12. So that being said, we would go to a home site, and what the existing staffing is for that school site, we would look within that school to examine who opted for a full resident remote learning and begin to pair students by appropriate grade spans. That being said, we could have 20 kindergartners that all want remote learning at one school. That's enough to essentially make a class. We could have 60 fifth graders. That might be 2 classes or 2 FTE serving fifth graders. I think it's really going to be dependent upon how our parents take the survey and really give us feedback on what option they want. And then again, we would master schedule from there using the existing FTE at that site.
So where it will get challenging is if they're coming in 15s or
Yes.
Yeah.
20s.
Yeah, so that puzzle is a puzzle we always face.
Yes.
And we'll balance that out. And I know that we'll have some great conversations with our teacher leaders on how best to do these things on a shorter scheduling time frame. But as an example of how that works, in regards to the flexibility that we would provide it, and Christine mentioned this earlier, it's likely not going to be just second grade. And other than the survey, we will have a date sometime probably by the 3rd week of July where families are going to have to declare. And this is your decision for the fall of 2020, and that's your program. So that I think is important to note, that we have flexibility, but at some point we are constrained by making sure that we keep classes under the contract language to be able to support kids and put them in programs where they have a cohort that doesn't, and that's a key piece, having stable cohort. And so we don't want students coming and going in and out of different programs, in and out of different classrooms.
If I can just ask very quickly though, for you to be able to make a statement that the same rigor in a resident school class would be similar to that in an in-person class. Christine?
Those are things that we are currently evaluating, and I think speaks to the slide around the curriculum and instruction. I think what our teachers who were part of the curriculum instruction steering committee did a really good job in their subcommittee developing is what that would actually look like. If you were fully remote learning, what would your schedule look like so that it actually mirrored what an in-person classroom was experiencing throughout the day? That being said, the teacher might not be live teaching, 6.5 hours a day in front of the student, but I know a large portion of their conversation really was aimed at what are the key essential components of that full-time remote learning day for a student that we need to make sure really mirrors what's happening in person in the classroom as well. And I can ask Ms. Pettish to add on to that because I know that was a good portion of her committee work.
Yes, huge shout out to my curriculum and instruction committee. They were absolutely amazing and are still amazing. So yeah, and I know that some of them, especially at the elementary level, looked at how our summer school program was doing it. Because of course for our K-12 summer school program, we had to go fully remote. And a lot of the teachers doing the elementary portion really had some interesting schedules, which is kind of what I said earlier in terms of starting off the day with a whole class meeting, doing a lot of small group work or individual conferencing. Because a lot of our teachers have expressed that it is, of course, challenging, especially with the little ones, to have, 25 of them on a Zoom. They don't mute or they're not paying attention or whatever it may be. So that the small group instruction has been really, really effective. And then something at the end to informally assess what students have learned during that time period. So kind of something to start people off, maybe some small group or individual work, and then something at the end where it kind of wraps everything up. And then they're back the next day kind of repeating that same rhythm.
At this point in time, do we have a sense, just even pie in the sky, of if we went to 5-day a week, what percentage we believe may be interested in a resident remote program that would actually reduce the number of students who would be in the 5-day a week at the school, basically putting on 2 programs, right? One would be the full 5-day week in school, the other would be the remote, but through the resident program.
So Ken, that will be one of our questions in the survey. In fact, it is a question in our survey that will be launched here in 12 hours or so. And then the other piece again, because spending more money in this state environment isn't going to happen on any solution. So the idea and the concept is, let's just say at one of our elementary schools, 50 families are interested in the local remote option. That would be 2 teachers, and likely classroom number 1 remote at elementary school A would be, say, K2 or K3, and the second cohort of students would be a 4-5 combo, and they would be the remote, with the 2 teachers working directly with those students. So that's an idea, and then we'll have a better sense after the survey lands here in the next couple weeks. And then ultimately, when we get direction from you in the middle of the month, middle of July, then we'll ask families to declare. But the good news is the families are hearing tonight what the options may be and getting a sense of what it is. So it's not we're going to ask them to make a decision in 2 or 3 days. Many will have a month lead in, and some of our communications that we promised, including one that's going out tomorrow, will begin to land in people's inboxes, and folks will really start to ask us more questions, engage with us, and continue to give us feedback on what they're thinking.
Thank you.
Okay, Rachel, any more questions?
I had a follow-up on that one. I guess I'm puzzled why it seems like it would be a lot more challenging for a teacher to teach K2 than to teach second graders that maybe came from 3 different attendance areas or 2 different attendance areas. And if it's remote, why? And I get that it's being packaged by school site, but are we missing something by narrowing it that much?
Absolutely, and I can speak to that. That is absolutely an option as well. I think the piece with the resident homeschool is that there would be an opportunity, if enrollment is available, for that student to go back. Okay. And then secondly, we would make our first concerted effort around forming those cohorts at the school site. But like Rick said, given the FTE constraints, if the passion for the families is more around their children learning remotely to us, then we're going to make that happen. Because even if it means that an FTE might be spread per se over 3 elementary schools, but a group of second graders get to learn together. We are not excluding that option. I think this is where the survey is going to really help us put that larger puzzle together.
And I'm guessing you've already written the survey, but I'm wondering if you need to be able to bifurcate that remote question, because I can picture some of our families it making a difference if they were in a what is our, when we have two years together, but I think 3 years together would be even more of an issue. I don't know.
Combo class.
Combo class, yeah.
Yes, I can let Deb speak to the survey and kind of how those questions are being addressed.
Yeah, well, we kind of try to get at the same point in several different questions to make sure that we're asking the questions correctly. And so one of them asks specifically about whether or not you would send your child to school in either a hybrid or full-time model, or you would prefer venture or venture independent study or remote learning at your home school. But I'd be more than happy to send you the survey.
No, I feel for you guys about how much information you are having to process. And I just think a key part of asking your questions is so that you get as much information out of the results and
Yeah.
are not having to rely on 2,000 or 5,000 or 10,000 narratives to try to figure this puzzle out. That's all I don't need to see the questions. I just want you guys to be sure that the questions are giving you the information that you need.
Thank you.
Any more questions, Rachel?
No, that's it. Thank you very much.
Any more questions? I didn't hear you, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. I said thank you. No, I'm done.
Okay.
I apologize.
Okay, so I've digested what everybody has been talking about. And I think tonight we're not making decisions. We're not saying this is the thing we're going to do. I think our purpose tonight is to try to help give staff an indication of where they need to apply their resources so that what decisions do come out in July have been thoroughly vetted, and we've looked at all the variables. What I would like to see if we could have a kind of a general discussion on priority. So I think I sort of know, based on the emails I've received, the phone calls, talking to kids, talking to parents, the surveys, the different data points that staff has been referring to, that our community, for the most part, would like to get back to a traditional mode of learning and teaching. I think that that old example of you don't put all your eggs in one basket, I think, boy, does it apply in this case. Because things are moving so rapidly, the guidelines are changing, so I would argue dramatically, just in the last few days, that opened up the ability to look at a viable 5-day-a-week full-time instructional program in person. But that could also change in 2 weeks. You know, we keep getting new numbers of infections and county health decides to clamp down or the state does something. So I don't want to put all our eggs in one basket, but I would be intrigued to see if I could get, and I'll start with it, what board members would prefer to see in terms of, you know, if you have choices, what would you prefer to see first? What would you prefer to see second? What would you prefer to see third? Without discounting any of them in terms of, oh, well, let's not do, as an example, no distance learning at all. It's not even an option on the table. I'm not suggesting that. What I'm saying is there a preference that the board members would like to explore so the staff knows where they can concentrate their resources on? You know, are we all in it for the hybrid model? Are we, you know, we want to move heaven and earth, go with a full normal instructional, in-person instructional program 5 days a week or whatever. So I'll start with that, and I think it'd be valuable information to give staff. Is that a fair statement? Staff is nodding their heads. Okay, so I'll start. Again, I have the advantage of being the last guy that cabooses. I've just described myself in the past because I've heard everybody else's ideas and thoughts, and question. I believe passionately that distance learning is a tool that, when properly used, can be a valuable, one of the valuable tools in our tool belt to help deliver proper and great instruction to our kids. But it should not be the only tool. Now, events may dictate to us, as they did after March 13th, that was really the only choice available. I am predicting that singular choice won't be available any longer. We'll have choices, plural, to make. So just as I believe strongly that distance learning is not the sole answer, I believe it shouldn't be thrown away. My preference is that we look strongly and we put as many resources as we reasonably can in developing a model in which we go back to school full time with appropriate distancing, appropriate organizing of the classroom, as was described by staff, that we do the appropriate masking and the sanitation and all the things that the county health has been suggesting, but that really is the model we need to concentrate our efforts on, but not the sole model, because I also passionately believe that there's a segment of our community that doesn't want to come back. I've talked to parents that say, I won't bring my child back until there's a vaccine. Well, that could be a year, it could be a year and a half. Do you want to be the trial guinea pig that gets shot with a vaccine? Is it proven? I don't think I would. I wouldn't want my kids to. So I think it's going to be a while before we have a vaccine. So for those people who don't want to come back until there is one, I don't think we say, well, then the door of education in this valley is closed to you. We need to give them that option of a distance learning model. I agree with staff's assessment that we can't do a full 5-day in person and offer a hybrid simultaneously. That simply isn't realistic. We don't have the resources. It just wouldn't work. It'd be a nightmare for the teachers to try to figure out how to make it all work. I didn't want to think about scheduling at the high school. Good Lord. So I think the option that I would be most interested in seeing if we could kind of get a nodding of the heads on is, let's put our resources on 5-day full instruction with all the appropriate guidelines that the county health has indicated, that what the science and the data is showing we need to do. And we offer distance learning for those that want it. I leave it to staff to dig deeper on what that would look like in terms of a venture component versus a local, maybe a regional. Maybe we could do regional components of, an area of the community. These 3 schools could be a cohort, if you will, for distance learning. I leave that to staff to look at the models that might work and come back to us with some recommendations. But I think we offer our parent community basically 2 options for that choice. That doesn't mean, so the 2 options again being 5-day a week in person and then distance learning for those that want it. I suspect the vast majority of our parent and student community will choose for the 5-day in-person instruction. But I also don't think we should abandon hybrid. And that's because we don't know what the state and the county guidelines could shift between now and August 11th, or even after we've started school, and they could shift. 2 weeks in, a month in, suddenly it's, oh, you can't have 24, 30 kids in a classroom, you have to be 12 or 15. Well, we have to then have the ability to pivot fairly quickly, obviously, to be able to offer something. I would see full distance learning as the choice of last resort, as that's the only thing we could offer. But we don't have much choice if the state or the county has issued an order like they did in the middle of March. But I think assuming that doesn't happen, my priority, and see if I get the rest of the board to agree, would be, let's prioritize full going back, distance learning as an option. That's option one. Option two, as a plan B, if you will, would be the hybrid model with distance learning as the second option. For those, again, those families who won't come back, period, unless there's a, full vaccine available. If it was up to me and I had, and I had a crystal ball and I could know exactly what's gonna happen in the next month, 2 months, 3 months, and I could say, okay, we don't have to worry about a resurgence of the pandemic, we don't have to worry about the county changing their rules, then I could tell you I want only one option to explore. But we don't have that ability that crystal ball to know with a full definitive way what may be coming down the road in a few weeks or even a few months. So I'd like to see if the board could, again, we're not making a decision, we're just giving nods of the head so that staff can devote what will be a very, very busy time in the next couple, 3 weeks to come back with something that's definitive, that's got details filled out, that our public can feel good about, to also give our public more time to provide us input in the surveys and the online events and in ever popular email. So could we see if we could get a consensus that would be the direction we would want staff to look at? Again, we're not abandoning anything, but we're looking at emphasizing choices. Mark, you had your hand up.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I think this is going to be the or one of the most consequential decisions this board makes together in our time together. So I did want to spend a little bit of time developing how I'm thinking about and how I'm processing this, just like you just did, Greg and Rachel, you shared before, because it is that important. I think people deserve to understand how I'm thinking through this. First of all, the punchline is I am aligned with you, Greg, is the fundamental to me is distance learning, remote learning, however we want to describe it. It is going to be with us in some capacity. As you mentioned, there are large numbers of our families who will not send their students back to the classrooms in any capacity currently, and that's perfectly reasonable given the current environment. We also may need to flex, given the state of the pandemic. There are increased cases in California currently. 2 months from now, undoubtedly is going to look different than today. And there may be different decisions that we need to make. So distance learning is going to be with us, in my opinion, in some capacity. So we have to get better. And I talked about the pillars of distance learning, and I have 4 of them, which are fairly well aligned to the 5 pillars in the presentation. Is one, we need a single technology platform delivery of content. We need a learning management system. That is imperative. We've heard it from many of our constituents in many emails over the last several weeks. It's imperative. Second, I wrote down live streaming of classes or other teacher-led curriculum content delivery. I understand that maybe we're not looking at streaming of classes. I suggest we continue to look at it if it's a viable alternative for us, but kids need to be in front of their teachers. That was also of paramount importance to our community members through their email feedback to me. Regular attendance, third pillar, regular attendance, check-ins at defined start of classes with instruction, small group, breakout, etc. What I mean by that is in talking with a lot of my friends and social circles who kids do attend private schools, their classes in many instances started on time. If they had an 8 o'clock class, their Zoom meeting started at 8 o'clock. Doesn't mean they were in front of the Zoom for the full hour, 50 minutes or whatever it was, but they started on time every single class. There needs to be structure, regular attendance, and check-ins. And the 4th pillar is robust assessment protocols. We have to be able to assess our kids and understand where they are in their learning journeys. Those are my 4 pillars. I really want to press the importance of understanding these with rigor and with specificity next time we get together. Remote learning and hybrid, the environment. There are some concerns, each of which I think are perfectly valid that have been mentioned. One, it does not work. Over the last 3 months, we've heard continuous criticism, and I think we can all take that as constructive and get better. Even with regular class start times on Zoom or what other learning management system we use, check-ins and single technology platform content delivery, students are going to be challenged in content acquisition and retention if it's remote. If it's 3 days remote, if it's 5 days remote, it's going to be challenged. We cannot duplicate the in-class experience of real-time, two-way communication between student and teacher and between students in the classroom. We cannot replicate that in an online environment. All the same personal challenges of distance learning are going to remain: equity, personal availability, tech availability, accountability, etc. All those concepts that challenged us over the last 3 months are still going to remain. Isolation. Kids are isolated. We've heard it over and over and over. It's creating environments for bad physical and emotional behaviors that are leading to adverse physical and emotional consequences. I see it in my own 2 children. Kids need to socialize. They need to feel connected and part of our schools. If you think back to our Healthy Kids survey, many of those questions focus on student engagement and connectivity to their schools. How can you feel either if you're sitting in front of a computer 6 hours a day? We can't replicate that in a distance learning environment. Other things we heard: families cannot continue to administer distance learning at home with efficacy. Dual income parents, parents unequipped to teach, family situations at home not fostering learning environments. As the economy continues to open up, parents are going to go back to work, placing even more challenges into the home, learn from home environment. And one of the other things we've also heard, and this I don't have a real good opinion on because I'm not a statistician, I'm not an epidemiologist, certainly not a health administrator, but does the hybrid distance learning really protect kids, teachers, administration, and community from viral spread materially and significantly than a full-time, full 5-day-a-week environment? I don't know the answer to that. Certainly our kids, especially at the high school and middle school levels, if they're in a remote environment, they will be socializing, especially as the social environments remain open. Is that going to protect our community more than 5 days a week full time? I don't know. To Rachel's point, maybe the safest place for our kids is in the classroom. Going back to conversations I've had with families who were happy with their remote learning environment and pleasantly delighted, not a single one of them said it was as rigorous and provided the exact same learning environment as in classroom. Not one parent I've spoken with a child in private high school who did all these things that I've talked about said that that was a good substitute for in-class environment. So we have to get our kids back on campus. Thing I'm thinking about in a full-time environment, right now, county health is not telling us it's dangerous. County health is not saying there's a public health concern. They're giving us guidelines to get back to school with safety protocols in place. And Greg, you did a good job of outlining those. So, and again, let's assume the next 2 months are static, we're in the same place. It won't happen, but let's assume in 2 months, environment and the pandemic is static. If we don't bring our kids back full time in August, all the science, I don't think there's a scientist out there that is saying come January, we'll be in a better place. Once we hit the winter months, we're probably going to be in a worse place. If we don't come back full time now and we go to a hybrid model or a full distance model now, I don't see us coming back all year. Greg, going back to your comment about the 60 Minutes interview, I remember one of the other questions. It really hit me pretty strikingly. John Dickerson was asking the chancellor at UNC Chapel Hill, if you were to bring kids back to campus but only teach them remotely, are you worried about a lost generation of students? I'm paraphrasing, but he used the words lost generation of students. That hit me really significantly because I started to think about my own 2 kids. Last 3 months, remote learning. If they're not in front of teachers 5 days a week for a whole nother year, are they going to become a lost generation of students? And it really sunk in. And that's where I really started to think, hey, there is validity in bringing kids back full time, especially now in this environment where State Department of Health, County Department of Health, nobody's telling us right now it's dangerous or a public health risk. If that changes, absolutely, we flex. We have to be able to flex back to a remote learning environment. One of the other things I've been thinking about, and I don't have a good answer to this either, is our employee base. We are partnering in extraordinary ways right now with our labor unions, our teachers, our classified personnel. But I don't yet have a good, clear picture is if we, over the next couple of weeks, start to make decisions about coming back, either full-time or in a hybrid environment, our teachers and custodials and classified office workers are the people who run our schools. Are they going to feel safe? Are they going to be on our campus? I don't yet have a good sense of that. So I can encourage the district to continue to work with our bargaining units to make sure that we understand their needs to get them back if this is the direction we're going to take. That's a long-winded way of saying it. I wanted to make sure everybody understood everything that's in my head, because this is important for our community to understand. I'm in favor right now in this environment of bringing our kids back with all the safety protocols we've talked about, 5 days full time, with a full-time remote learning, distance learning alternative. And I really like the venture, by the way. That's the third, the third alternative. That's where I'm at.
Rick had a comment that he wanted to make. Go ahead, Rick.
Because I'll forget. Thank you, all of you, thanks to all of you for beginning to kind of frame some direction for us. Thank you. It's really important for us to hear from all of you. So I think, Mark, the hybrid versus full-time, in multiple conversations over a couple of months now from infectious disease doctors, there isn't a lot of difference. I mentioned that when I was talking with Rachel a little bit earlier in this meeting. In terms of employees' health and safety front and center, and I know that's equally important as is our family health, kids and parents and others. So I think I appreciate the 4 pillars, just a quick little walkthrough. I think this might help all in terms of the remote learning piece, because even though that might not be option number 1, it's going to be part of our future at some point, likely. And many families are going to select that option. So your first pillar, Mark, single tech platform, we're working on it. We're trying to get there. Nearly every district in the region is attempting the same thing. So we're working on that. The live stream in class, it might not be a live stream with a camera, but getting in front of kids with the teacher now becomes likely mandatory. Again, we need to interpret, and this goes into number 3, regular attendance and structure. The guidelines that came out today require attendance, and there are specific guidelines about being in class, even if it's when you're at home. So that's new. And I think your 4th one, Mark, a robust assessment. Our very strong recommendation, as you saw, is staff is asking for that nod on July that we go back and restore grading as we know it, both formative assessments throughout the week, the course, and the grade, and also summative assessments. So go back to traditional assessments. That's our very strong recommendation.
And just last point, and I'm sorry, Ken, is I also agree with you, Greg, we cannot give up on the hybrid model. What happens in 2 months from now, physical distancing, the guideline goes up to 8 feet. We don't have the capacity to do full-time 5 days at 8 feet, just as a hypothetical. So can't give up on the hybrid. You got to keep studying it.
Okay. All right, Ken, you had a question or comment?
No comment. Yeah, I'm along the same lines. I guess, Greg, one of the things you said up front was you felt that a majority of people wanted the kids back 5 days a week. I would just alter that statement slightly and say, I think everyone wants their kids back in school, normal time, 5 days a week, if we can ensure a safe environment. And if and when that happens, because what that says is even the folks who are home right now and want their kids to stay home, if the environment was secure, at some point in time, they're going to want their kids back in school as well, I believe. Now, there may be some who decide, yes, at some point in time, venture is an option for them and their children, but they have to be able to work independently. But unless parents are home with their kids, and that environment is really starting to shift as well, makes that part of it that much more difficult right now. And it's one of the reasons why I appreciate what you're saying about having to keep a hybrid model in the mix, but I'm moving further and further away from that, given the way that the environment is changing. I find it really hard to believe that we're going to go from 6 feet to 8 feet at this point. I've heard things about, well, you have to stay 30 feet away from people. Well, those things aren't realistic. We've also heard 3 feet from a lot of folks as well. So, seeing this 4 to 6 now is really, as Rachel was saying, it's a game changer. It really makes a difference in terms of what might be possible in that short term. So getting kids back to school in a safe environment, I think is critical. The hybrid, as talked about earlier, I think, Rachel, you brought this on up too, is, it's hard to imagine that between that first section and the second section, we're going to go in and sanitize the entire school for that next cohort of kids who comes in, whether it's the next day or the next part of the day. It seems logistically, very challenging at best. I appreciate a lot of Mark's comments. Mark, you're always so eloquent. I really appreciate them, well thought out. A lot of what you spoke about with the remote learning, with the challenges that we're going to face to do it rigorously and correctly. The one thing that I would add, and we've talked about this as well, we were forced into the distance learning in March. What I would love to believe is that we can find some opportunities going forward, even as we go back to a full, regular, almost normal type of educational program, that distance learning can in fact be utilized as someone said, as a tool that we can utilize a whole lot better than it may have been used before. That blended option, that flip option, there's different ways of approaching what it is that distance learning can actually do and actually improve the classroom experience as well. So that you're not sitting at a desk doing your homework, you're learning in school, you're facilitating, the teacher's facilitating in the classroom, you're having those worthwhile collaborative conversations in the classroom, and then activities that can be done outside the classroom can be done there. And finding the kind of systems and programs that would really enhance that part of our educational structure. So look at how can we not just try to stabilize our rigor, but increasing the academic capabilities of our students coming out of all of this. For me right now, I do believe that, from what we're hearing, the 5-day a week, I think makes the most sense in terms of, as you put it, priorities. That would be my first priority, to see what it's going to take to make sure that we can create that safe environment and have people feel that it's safe to have their kids at school. And even more importantly, have kids feel that it's safe to be in that environment after everything that they're hearing on the news. Secondarily, the remote distance learning for those families who are not quite there, as well as our staff that's not quite there for whatever reason, whether it's the risk factors that they personally face or other issues. And it may very well be, as I think Susanna says, we have some folks that are just tremendous at doing distance learning. Let's make sure we have folks performing those kind of activities if in fact we go there. And then, as Mark also mentioned, the venture program, I think it's an opportunity for us to really enhance that program and make it all that it can be for those students that would do well in that type of environment, and really not just put it aside, but really deal with it as an equal alternative that our students can consider. I keep going back to our personal learning initiatives, that idea of providing options to families and kids to give them the best individualized learning experience that's going to help them move forward the best. And I think between those, and again, for me, I would move the hybrid further off the plate right now, because of the logistics and because the amount of time and resources it would take for something that I'm not sure we would actually see us move towards, from the environment we're in to even the environment we need to go to if we see spikes and we get different direction from the health department. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, so Mark and Ken both said something that I wanted to amplify on. Mark, you were absolutely right. The comment that was made by the university chancellor president about a lost generation. I think that is a very valid concern, that if we don't get back to a normalized in-person environment, every day that we're not doing it is a day that we will, that's lost forever to that child, whether they're in first grade or they're 11th grade. Every day that they're not experiencing the maximum that they can from an educational experience is a loss that they can never recover. And so the effects of this pandemic isn't just going to be something that we as a society have felt physically. It's also, if we don't handle this correctly, it can also be something that we will feel as a society for decades to come, because we'll have kids that are now adults, going to college, trying to get jobs. It won't be as fully prepared. Not every door that would have been open to them will be open because they lost some of that instructional time. Obviously, the longer that we do that, the loss, the bigger the damage, the longer the damage will be felt. So I think it's kind of like a ripple effect in a pond. We can stop this. I think the bottom line, I think we've got tools available to us to limit that damage and get back to a normal, high quality instructional program with the ability to pivot if we have to, if the data, as you said, Mark, shows that we're going to get locked down again or whatever. But Ken, I also agree with what you said about the distance learning as a tool. It is a tool that we need to not abandon because for some kids it was effective, for other kids it was not. But I think what we learned is that if the only model that we have for delivery is distance learning, it isn't going to be as effective as an in-person. I don't care how good a job we do with distance learning, some kids simply don't learn effectively that way. They have a different learning modality than what distance learning, there's no synergy there, if you will. And so distance learning has its place. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm saying if it's the only delivery model, I got a problem with it. If it's one of the tools that we can use available to kids when it makes sense and families when it makes sense, then I think that's the best option available, where it's basically normal instruction in person with a tool available for distance learning for those that need it, but also in the long term, looking at how we can integrate a distance learning model in our normal instructional environment. I think that's an intriguing challenge, and I think it's something we ought to look at. Because distance learning can be effective and it has its place, as long as it's a tool, not the tool. Ken.
Yeah, just one more quick comment before I turn it over to my colleagues for their additional comments. This one for staff. In terms of safety and PPE, I'm just interested in the difference between face masks and face shields. I saw a face shield earlier today, and then I saw some pictures of, I think it was a class in China that was all using the face shields. And again, money is always an issue, that type of thing. But the opportunity in class, assuming we have some point we're back in class, but we have to have those coverings, the idea of being able to see someone fully makes a big difference. Then, I was just at an event this weekend where everyone's got their face covered up, and it's a whole different relationship experience in having conversations with folks when that face is partially covered. The shields look awkward, but I'd be very interested if there's any work that can or needs to be done to see their effectiveness as opposed to a face mask.
Got it. Before we have further discussion, I need a motion. We're almost at 10 o'clock. I need a motion to extend probably, I'm going to say till 11. Is there a motion? Okay, I have a motion from Rachel.
Second.
Till 11.
Okay,
Yeah,
Susanna.
yes.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. For those that are watching, we have a protocol that requires if we can't finish by 10, we have to have a unanimous consent to move on. Okay. Any other comments from, okay, Susanna.
Yeah, I have to be honest, when I think Rachel might have referred to this earlier, that I was a little bit surprised when I heard from County Health their change in requirements, right? From like 6 foot to 4 feet minimum. And I was further surprised when I heard that oh, we can fit 31 kids in a class, because that's basically, right, full back to, so knowing,
Take the other furniture out though, Susanna. That's what
true,
they said.
furniture out and
Take the
everything.
furniture. Right, right.
But, so I was a little surprised, and again, safety, right? Priority, safety. But if we're gonna do it, if we're going to be careful and put in place all the protocols and everything, and if this is really guidance from public health, because I know that I've actually talked to parents both who are advocating for a full day, right, back to school, and those who are advocating for the hybrid, because they're trying to balance, right, safety, but we know that kids, again, social emotional, they need some face time, right, with teachers and with each other. So they were advocating for hybrid. And so I, again, just thought that, full class of 31. And I think that the parents who are advocating for hybrid was concerned that we weren't really looking at the science or, following, right, the health, the health professionals, public health professionals. But if this is kind of a guidance from our county public health, and they seem to think that that's right, that's safe, or like you said, the number of feet, I guess, of distance is kind of arbitrary. Then I'm starting to come around to that, because I was thinking also that full day would be fine. Again, balancing safety and but social emotional, as well as, like you said, we need to get back to really the education, the quality education, the learning, the rigorous learning that our students need. So yeah, just, thinking through everything. I actually work with high school students, right? And I work with them remotely. And I do agree that most of them, very few, they're fine with remote, but most of them have indicated that, they're not happy. They're having issues with not engaging, with before with teachers, and now maybe, with their friends. And I think that, again, social emotional, very important. So I would agree that maybe if we look at going back, in class, so that they could have that experience. But I don't want to abandon hybrid. And that's why I keep pushing and questioning venture, right? Whether or not maybe venture type style could be, almost like a hybrid option. I know it's different, but perhaps for those families who, do worry more about, oh, they have grandparents living with them, so they can't, they can't go back in, perhaps either remote or maybe independent study or something like that would serve them better. Again, I just want to, speak to those families who are thinking hybrid, because, they want to make sure that we are following science, data, and what our public health official is recommending. But, oh yes, and I mean, I can't see not having full remote, only because, again, as we might need to go right back in the fall to full remote. But yes, I do agree. We really need to make sure that we have this, it's a single platform, structure, consistency, from our teachers and to provide students what they need for the, the remote learning. I don't see it as like, oh, that's a nice to have. I see that we need that, but we really, really need to work on a more really robust version of that for the students.
Okay, Susanna, before we go to Rachel, Rick wanted to clarify something in the comment.
Susanna, thank you for kind of coming back to venture and so I think technically venture is hybrid and has been for many years. There is the very independent part of that, as you know, and then there is the one-on-one opportunity depending on the circumstances in each student, because it's a very personalized program. Whether it's virtual or in person, those programs are technically hybrid. I think maybe depending on the interest in venture, we may have to kind of work with our leaders, our teacher leaders and our administrator down at venture to change that up just a bit. And I think those are all possibilities. So I think it is technically hybrid, leaning way more independent, but again, within the guidelines of what independent study is, we may be able to kind of change that a bit.
Okay. Rachel.
I think I gave my direction in my first comments. Maybe you
started.
I know she started it.
But I think it's really important that we don't look at these as like priority 1, priority 2. In my mind, it's looking at whatever way it is, and it sounds like we're unanimous that we prefer the 5-day if we can do that as a return to school option. And then the other is we have to provide a robust remote because we do have students who can't come back, whether it's for their own health or family members' health. And I think we have to look at those as they're even. One doesn't take priority over the other. And then I believe the venture really is another, whether you call it a variation of the remote or if it actually is a third. I think most of the people we heard from about hybrid were voicing that they wanted us to be responsible about returning back to school and ensuring safety. When they were all writing to us, the rules were different. So I think you have your consensus.
I think we do. Do you feel comfortable? Do you have any questions of us? Do you think you have enough direction so you guys can spend the next 16 hours a day coming up?
So I don't have any questions, but I'd like to summarize, if that's okay, to make sure that we're clear on our next steps.
What did you hear us say? Yes.
Well, do you have 3 hours? No, just kidding. So again, I want to appreciate all of you. Thank you. This was a rich and important conversation. And just peaked, we have 2,300 of our community members watching tonight. So that means a lot. Thank you, community members, as well. So again, each and every family will weigh risk. And I think my assurance to all of you is that we will provide the very best and safest return to school options that are practical and available to us, and follow all the guidelines, all of the recommendations, and clearly all the public health work that's ongoing and been helpful so far. I'm also pleased to hear that you're hearing public health. They're giving us an opportunity, and I believe we're one of the first districts in the state from all of our network to have this conversation about returning full time. And so I'm proud of staff for turning this around in 4 days. I'm proud of the trustees for being so thoughtful about how you've approached this. So to summarize, I think all 5 trustees believe full-time is best for kids, along the lines of making sure that it's safe, and that's our work. The remote learning, to continue to work on that and improve it, and work with our employee group leaders to continue to develop that and make it more robust and make it more responsive and create the opportunity for the families who do elect one of the 2 remote learning versions, whether it's venture or the more localized version, to have a really strong program to take care of their students up to and including through the entire year. And then finally, I think would like to strongly recommend that we begin to work later this week through Cindy Fisher to schedule a special board meeting the week of the 13th and see what your options are for that, to ask for clear direction. And that gives us another couple weeks to interpret trailer bills, to look at public health and where that's headed, and to then have an ability to, by the middle of July, to reach out to all 31,000 plus families and ask them to make a decision so we can build, staff, schedule.
Okay. All right. Nothing else on this item?
Just real quick, I'm assuming district's going to send out an email for the survey, just to make sure that everybody, I feel very strongly in a follow-up survey.
I believe that's going out, Chris George, tomorrow.
Thank you.
It's ready to go. The letter's written and all the links are live and we're ready to go.
Oh, can I make one more?
Oh, yes,
One
Susanna.
more, yeah, just one more observation for families that, for families who are, thinking about going back full time in classroom, that still sounds like it's not going to be the same, right? So there's going to be, differences from what kids have experienced before. And I just kind of want to make that point. So, that maybe expectations of actually, if they were going back to classroom, there's, lots of differences in the classroom than before.
Right. So it isn't going to be back totally obviously to the way it was because of all the health guidelines that we're going to be expecting.
Right.
Yeah, I just thought of something, and maybe staff has thought of it previously. So Chris George, when the communication goes out, is there a way, if we haven't already done it, to include the final version of the school reopening document from Public Health and the County Office of Ed?
Yeah, we've already arranged to have that posted on the Reopening Together website. So that'll be posted tomorrow along with the links to serve it, but we can drop it in the communication as well.
Okay, like I said, staff's always way ahead of me.
But one of the things that I think people are going to comment on after tonight's meeting is why can't we make a decision tonight, or let's have a special meeting, Monday and make and vote on it. We have to give, and frankly, I would love that, except I'm also a realist. We have to give time for staff to be able to prepare, then come up with ideas. Now we're going to have to get down the devil in the details kind of thing. They're going to have to dig deep to now fill all this out about what it's going to look like, number one. And number two, it's such a moving target in terms of the science and the data and the health guidelines. And I think Mark had commented about there was a greater number of cases in California. We were seeing a bit of a spike. What is that all going to look like? So it gives us a little more time to get more informed information so we can make that final decision based upon as up-to-date data as we can get from the science and from the data and from the guidelines from county and state.
Greg, one more comment,
Yes,
if
sir.
I can, on this topic. It's kind of a public service announcement because we do have a pretty good sized audience right now, which tends to drop off once we get off of the interesting topics. Just this past couple of weeks, I had an opportunity to visit other parts of the state. And what I witnessed was, as different safety measures were being laxed, people went overboard in dropping masks, for instance. And for this to work, we really need our community to be focused on doing what each and every one of us needs to do. And the first one of that is the masking. When we're outside, when we're around other people, when we're in stores and in the community. Because if we do see that spike, we don't know exactly what the health department locally is going to do, but it's going to make it that much more difficult for us to move in the kind of direction that we're looking to right now. So I'm kind of hoping that our community is going to take it very seriously about wearing the mask, and also working with your kids to make sure that they're getting used to it too. Because like I said, if we go back to school full time, the expectation as of today is that those 12-year-olds and older are going to be wearing masks all through the school day. And they need to be prepared to take that seriously. So like I say, public service announcement. Thank you.
All right, we're on to It's only gonna get better from here, folks. We're fun things still coming on the agenda. All right, that was a lead, trying to keep you past the commercial break. All right, 9.3, President's comments, and Casper SRVU President and our Director of Communications, Chris George, is going to read her comments.
Thank you. These are the comments from Ann Katzberg. Dear trustees, as leaders during a pandemic, a fiscal crisis, societal and cultural unrest, we are dealing with unforeseeable circumstances. We are facing a future where we are forced to make decisions impacting the lives of so many without knowing what the future holds. We need to consider nothing less than the education of our children, our future, their social emotional well-being, and the health and safety of our community. This is an arduous responsibility, one that penetrates us viscerally, stripping us of our sleep, and leaving us struggling with the decision we must take. What parameters should be used to determine next steps? There is no obvious single answer, no endgame that will provide everyone with a welcome feeling of security or relief. No matter what we do, to some we will be right-thinking heroes, while to others we will be insensitive traitors. There is so much emotion, so much personally invested, regardless of how each person views the current circumstances. We will do our best, even knowing that for many it will not be good enough. It will not be what they want to hear, what they feel is the right plan. During the last 2 weeks since our last school board meeting, I've been privileged to receive many emails from our parents in the community, along with a constant delivery of letters from SRVU members articulating their perspectives and needs during this time of uncertainty. An uncertainty that breeds anxiety and fear, fueling more questions and generating tangible tension in our midst. The community is completely polarized. This current state does not support our ability to come together and creatively design a model of education for our students that both educates and protects them. We can't dial back history and start our schools as though we never experienced a pandemic. We hear daily on the news how the increase in COVID cases continues to surge. Do we forget how we sheltered in place for 10 weeks to flatten the curve? Do we want our past efforts to be in vain? Today's board meeting is the first hearing of the creative, collaborative work of our members in SRVIA, SEIU, CSEA, and management. Listening in on several committees, I witnessed the collective energy of professionals who address the possibilities of what we can consider to open our schools effectively this fall. So how will we decide our future? We have been given guidance and recommendations from the CDC, the Public Health Departments of California, and the guidelines from the Department of Public Education, Stronger Together, the guidebook for a safe reopening of schools. This process can't be about opinions up for debate. These safety considerations are paramount to any decision you make. We must all take precautionary measures to keep us all safe. We must follow the current guidelines of professionals to direct us and ensure our physical, social, and emotional well-being, while still planning for the most effective delivery model for our students, teachers, and communities' well-being. We must also be recognized as educational professionals. We will provide guidance, best practices, and ensure our students get a quality education. But the work of our committees must be heard. Our schools are outstanding institutions because of our educators. Our community knows that. Our parents moved to this district because of our schools. We must not forget the great work we have always done and will continue to do. Our fiscal crisis is a reality that can't be ignored in the heat of the moment. We must determine our district's budget based on the facts. Thankfully, the legislatures and the governor have arrived to an agreement protecting the funding for education. In the words of our governor, when asked about the state budget, Governor Newsom said, "I think the funding will substantially exist. We think a lot of anxiety is mitigated." We understand there is still so much to be done to provide financial security for our underfunded schools. We still need to partner together and develop a plan addressing this fiscal crisis. We can't take the easy way out and succumb to predictions that may not come to fruition. Rather, I invite you to share in the responsibility of finding solutions for our future. SRVIA has called upon our members to reach out to our senators in Congress and work to pass the HEROES Act. SRVIA is developing a campaign to make sure Schools and Communities First passes in November, bringing future funding to our schools. We need to work on winning solutions that guarantee a future for our students past this pandemic. Our partnership is a necessity to get us all through these most turbulent times. We need to continue to find a way to do the work together on behalf of our students. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we're on to action items, and we had a number of items pulled from consent, and we put them at the top of the action item list. So we're first going to talk about 11.5. which is consideration of approval of contracts and purchases over 50,000.
I think that's 11.3, Greg.
Did I say 11.5?
Yeah, I think you meant 11.3, just,
I meant 11.3. I'm sorry.
okay.
Consideration of approval of contracts and purchases over 50,000. I didn't bring my glasses. All right, 11.3. So, Mr. Medici.
Thank you, President Marble. We know that we've, annually, we bring forward a list of kind of the following year's anticipated kind of major open purchase orders and other kind of vendor relationships. This is a standing item annually around this time, and specifically in the last few days, we've gotten questions around, for instance, the Home Depot open purchase order. And I can say that a lot of thought was put behind all of these. And for instance, Home Depot actually acts as kind of a warehouse for us in essence, and we believe saves tens of thousands of dollars annually by not having to stock our own supplies. So our service team members can go to Santa Monica Home Depot and get items. And for scale and context, we do have over $3 billion with a B of facilities in the district. So I know it's hard for all of us to kind of wrap our minds around the scale of what we're involved in, but you know, $129,000 of investments in an open purchase order at Home Depot is actually roughly equivalent on $1 million house to about you know, hundreds of dollars at most for a year in a household investment. So I know another example on the list was our purchase of vehicles. We annually purchase vehicles over a multi-decade refresh cycle. The district owns well north of 100 vehicles. And specifically, very specifically, these vehicles are part of a design next year that's going to help save an estimated $160,000 in grounds costs. So that's why we're very thoughtfully bringing this recommendation to the board. And finally, I believe there was a question related to, which actually is maybe its own item as well later, but our volunteer open purchase order through and with Be a Mentor. That is a long-standing relationship that has a component of software license, maintenance of kind of effort and screening of the approximately 25,000 volunteers that we already have in the system. And if, as some of the guidance seems to be suggesting, if we're going to kind of minimize the amount of new volunteers on campus, then we may have an opportunity to kind of not invest in new volunteers, which could save on this, again, open purchase order. So I think those were the three big picture over $50,000 items, and thanks.
Any questions from board members?
Yeah, I just want to clarify, Greg, because I asked the question about the trucks, right? And I think what you said is really we're at least a few of those trucks that we're purchasing will be actually, we're basically not working with a more expensive third-party contractor on some of the work that has to be done in the facilities or the sites, and that those trucks are actually, we're bringing those work in-house, and so we're actually saving even though we're purchasing some of these trucks. Is that
That's
right?
correct.
Okay, thank you. I just want to make sure.
Ken.
Yeah, just a couple of quick things. Greg was just talking about Be a Mentor, and just to clarify, you know, the Be a Mentor software he's talking about is part of our safety and security system for checking on the safety of our volunteers and who it is that's volunteering in school. So it's not volunteer system clearance, it's really a safety system for who's coming on campus, just to clarify. The other thing I'll just mention is there is an item on here about AT&T. I will be recusing myself on anything having to do with AT&T or other telecommunication providers. However, I will be voting for the rest of the list.
Any other questions or comments on this particular item?
Just Greg, just so I'm clear, because these are the three that popped up as generating a little bit of energy. The Be a Mentor is an open PO. To your point, Greg, we don't spend unless we're actually in an environment where we're increasing volunteer rates on campus. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's correct.
Okay.
And in addition to that, because I asked Greg about this earlier today too, there's a small amount that goes to maintenance of effort in it. And if anybody remembers back when we implemented Be a Mentor, it was a much bigger project than anyone anticipated, because Be a Mentor had no concept of how many volunteers we have in San Ramon Valley Unified School District. And so we wouldn't want to just drop that for the year and lose all that effort to put the 25,000 volunteers in there. So we'll just be in a holding pattern until we need to be clearing new volunteers. So it's great that people asked us this question. And I think it's good that we're discussing it so that they understand it. It's an example of how, what Greg said in the beginning, they scrutinize these things. They're not just spending money because we always spend this money. These are things that are needed.
Yep. And then Greg, I don't know service trucks very well, so apologies, but F-250, F-450, F-250 standard. Can you just give me a little bit of detail about the need for those particular trucks and maybe just reiterate how they're saving us money?
Correct. Right. The 450 actually is specifically some actual new capacity to tow around a kind of tractor that's going to have a attachment for mowing lawns that is kind of bigger and again allows us to bring what was outside contracted lawn mowing to in-house capacity. And then the 250s are just by nature kind of vehicles that can handle kind of larger weights in their beds themselves on top of being able to tow something. And very specifically, we actually do utilize the beds of trucks to bring around kind of pallets of materials, even for things like water and things. So like the 250 standard, and these are all work trucks. These are not fancy trucks, but they are capable of towing and putting things in the bed that a normal 150 version is not. Okay.
And last one was what's going on with the sports field lighting at Monte Vista?
That's part of again, kind of Office of Public School Construction and Division of State Architect ongoing kind of multi-year upgrades. And so yes, it is a large number, but it also, but lighting and poles are expensive endeavors, and again, part of a kind of multi-decade refresh cycle. So that's why we're bringing it forward tonight.
Right. So I think the other thing, and so I want to echo what some board members have said. I welcome the scrutiny on our budget items, on our expenditures, because I think people, these are normally consent items, but people need to know that staff isn't spending the taxpayers' money frivolously, I think was one term that was used in a number of emails, or unwisely. They're spending them very, very judiciously. And as Greg Medici indicated, the expenditure on the trucks are actually going to save us a lot of money every year from what we've been spending previously. The other thing is people don't understand that we have different budgets. So we have general fund money, and then we have facilities money. And we have money that comes from developer fees. So as an example, the homes that were built above Home Depot that are still being sold, the developers had to pay the school district money that goes into a special fund to be spent on our facility needs. We have facility bond money. I think somebody made a comment about some stuff we were doing at one of the middle schools on a quad. I can't remember which one that was. But again, that was money being spent from our facilities bond. It wasn't general fund money. General fund money has zero restrictions. We can spend it on whatever we want. Categorical money or restricted money is money that can only be spent for a specific purpose. People had said, well, just don't spend that money at all, or take that money that you would have spent on that quad at the middle school and spend it on the lights, and instead spend it on hiring more teachers, as an example. That would be illegal, because these facility money, you can only spend it on facility projects, and there's a law. Both federal regulations, because facility bonds are put out in the open market for a specific purpose. You got federal regulations, you got state regulations that says how we can spend it. Also, 3% of the budget, the general fund budget, by law, must be spent on facility maintenance, facilities and grounds. We have to. It's basically to make sure that we, as a district, don't ignore projects that need to be done from a facilities perspective. We ignore it until a $100,000 problem for a leaky roof becomes a $5 million problem, because we waited years to fix the roof, and now we have dry rot, we have black mold, the whole school has to be evacuated and rebuilt because black mold has infested the the building itself. That happens when you don't invest properly in your facilities. And so the state passed a law a number of years ago that said 3% of the budget had to be spent, general fund had to be spent on facilities, plus the money that we get from developer fees and the money that we get from our facility bond. So we have over $3 billion in facilities and grounds to maintain, and that is not something you can ignore. And if you do, the end result is catastrophic in terms of your ultimate cost to now go back and fix the problems you created because you ignored it. So I think these questions are legitimate questions. I'm pleased that people are asking, because ultimately this is not our money, it's your money. It's the people's money. And so people have a right to ask why we're spending it. But I hope, hopefully this will clarify some of the questions that people had about what we're doing. So we are now going to we're now going to vote on 11.3, and I need a motion. Okay, Rachel is making a motion.
So moved.
I need a second. Somebody, okay, Susanna raised her hand. Any further discussion or comments? Hearing none, I'll call for the question. All in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Opposed say no. Motion carries unanimously. And then Ken, do you want to say it again, just so that?
Yeah, just that if the minutes can reflect that any item having to do with AT&T or the telecommunication providers, I need to recuse myself on that part of the vote.
Thank you. All right. We then also pulled 11.6, which was live stream media. We had one comment in favor of it, Mr. Medici.
This is coming to the board tonight after a lot of thought and great work from the athletic directors, as well as Ken Nelson's leadership in student services. It will allow us to virtually display sporting events with hopefully with maximum kind of options for people to kind of see their students participate in sports and not have to physically be on site. There was a question related to the timing, and it's a system that even if there wasn't sports in the fall, that there is some lead time to install it. So it's certainly designed to last for many, many years. So we brought it forward thoughtfully and hopefully with an eye towards sports returning in the future.
Okay, any comments from board members? Okay, I need a motion.
So moved.
Okay, Ken has made the motion. I need a second.
Second.
Okay, Mark has seconded. Any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for the question. All in favor say aye.
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 Aye, opposed say no. Motion carries unanimously. The final item that we pulled from consent was 11.8, which is consideration of adoption of resolution 87/19-20, authorizing the approval of routine budget revisions.
This is a standing item, obviously customized each time, but very routine budget revisions. And as just a general reminder, our budget, which across all funds is well in excess of $400 million, is a living document. So adjustments are made in real time when we get new and better information, and that's how these revisions are brought forward.
And any questions from board members? Comments? Okay, hearing none. I need a motion. Rachel is making the motion. I need a second.
Second.
Okay, come on. There we go. Mark, I couldn't tell if you were raising your hand or you had an itch. Okay. All right, we have a motion and we have a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Opposed, say no. Motion carries unanimously. All right.
And Greg, Greg,
Yes,
just
sir.
another thing. When we were doing the initial consent calendar, I do need to recuse myself on item 11.5 along the same lines of anything having to do with AT&T or other telecommunication providers. It's not always clear from that item if there is something, but just for
Okay.
just general reason, need to include that statement. Thank you.
Got it. And, oh, and it looks like we had one more that we had pulled, which is, hold on, just double checking. Yeah, 11.5. Did we talk about 11.5? I think we kind of sort of generally touched on some of them, right? The warrants?
I don't believe there were any comments on that. Or
Yeah, okay, no comment. For some reason it was pulled.
Mine does indicate we pulled 11.5, not 11. But it doesn't hurt us to do both, so it's just on this,
Yeah,
there on the side.
so
Sorry
I
about
think
that.
that might be, we can do it, but there was, the comment was on 11.8, not on 11.5.
fine, got it. All right, so let's talk about ratification of warrants. So go ahead and explain how all that works, Mr. Medici.
This is again a standing and routine item, living every month as the district issues its various checks. This balance is fully audited, not only by our internal team, but by external teams when we have our third party auditors, as well as when we request checks from the Treasury, and the Treasury balances, the balances, the actual cash balances they hold for us against the warrants that we issue. So all of the data is summarized here, and every warrant that we issue is available in the business office for any other documentation purposes.
Got it. Any questions on warrants?
Move
Okay, I
approval.
need a motion.
Move approval.
Okay, I need a second.
Second.
Okay, got a second. Any further discussion? All right, all in favor say aye.
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 Aye, opposed say no. Motion carries unanimously. And it was my fault. I own it. I know it's rare that I own it, but I own it. 11.8, there was a comment on 11.8. I had it on the same line of list of pulling, so my mistake. I apologize. Okay, write that down. I made a mistake. All right, 10.1, consideration of approval of COVID-19 operations written report. Mr. Medici, you are on again. You're on a roll.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Ed Services team continues to do great work with all things local control accountability plan. As part of the state's COVID-19 kind of evolution in the LCAP process, this is kind of an intermediate template update for the public, and final updates related to next year's LCAP will be presented by December next fall.
Okay, any questions from staff or comments from board members, I should say? Okay, I need a motion. This is an action item. Okay, Ken has made a motion. I need a second. Susanna has seconded. Any further questions or comments? All right, hearing none, I'll call for the question. All in favor, say aye.
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 Say aye. Nobody's talking.
Aye.
Oh, okay, there we go.
Aye.
Thank you. Aye, all right. There we go. I'll take thumbs if I need to. All right, all opposed say no or thumbs down. Hearing none, the motion carries unanimously. We're on to 10.2, consideration of adoption of the 2020-21 district budget, including the excess report.
Thank you again, President Marvel. This is the action step of the information presented at our last board meeting. The information is identical, and so thank you tonight.
Questions from board members? Ken?
Yeah, Greg, I just wondered if you can just talk just a moment about what's going on from what happened with the state the last couple of days and how that affects this and our path forward.
Yes, thank you, Trustee Mintz. On Monday, the governor and the legislature announced that they had reached a budget compromise that was different than the governor's vision of the May revise, his own thoughts about the budget, and then different also than the legislature's thoughts. So somewhere in the middle. Full details are yet to be kind of fully exchanged. And there are many pending trailer bills, is our understanding. So we will fully integrate any information and hopefully as much positive information, of course, into the state required 45-day revise. This adopted budget is a requirement to be acted upon before June 30th. And again, it's a living document, and we will continue to update it when we get better and best information from Sacramento.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or comments from board members?
I just want to be clear, because there was some energy around the adoption of this budget as well this week. There is a legal requirement for us to adopt this budget. This budget will change, right, with the 45-day revise. That's for you, Greg. I just want to make sure we fully understand what the process is.
Oh, understood. I apologize. Once Sacramento kind of fully publishes and kind of the statewide experts fully digest the details in the budget, we will work throughout July to align any updates. Most obviously on the revenue side of the equation. Early word is that basically there is less of a cut overall and more cash deferrals, which complicates the accounting side of our world and may increase borrowing costs, but otherwise is at least for immediate term better news than where we were just a few short days ago. So again, the 45-day revision is a state required budget update. It's actually specifically designed around the fact that school districts and school boards have to act on adopting a budget 99 out of 100 times before full information is known about the state's budget. So the 45-day revision allows for alignment with the state's actual past budget.
So good news, better than what the governor proposed in May. Bad news, a whole lot of complexity and uncertainty is how all this gets funded, considering the $54 billion budget deficit the governor has outlined, and how that's all going to filter down.
We're losing you, Mark. We lost you there. You kind of froze.
Oh, sorry.
For a good second, but I think we heard the good news is better than May. The not so good news is that there's still, multi-billions of dollars in questions about where this money is coming from. So yes, that is correct.
Yeah. So got to pass it tonight, but it's going to change. Just want to make sure everybody fully understand that watching.
Right, Susanna, Rachel, any comments? Questions? And Susanna, there you are. I was going to say you look frozen there. I don't know if it must be.
I'll move around.
Everybody, I think it's a problem on our end with our connection maybe. I don't know, the fact that Susanna was frozen and Mark was kind of garbled. So we'll, technology, we'll make it work. Susanna, do you have any comments or questions?
No, I mean, it's pretty clear. Even though the budget is going to change and it's not going to be, I don't want to say wrong, but it's not going to be the same. We have to pass it, right? I mean, we have to adopt it because that's what's required by law.
Rachel, any questions or comments?
It's been covered. Thank you.
Good. All right. So before I call for the question, I just want to, I want people that are watching, because we've got a lot of emails on budgets. I want people to understand that the budgeting process in California public schools is something to behold. It makes no sense from a financial perspective because you're asked to adopt a budget when you don't actually know what your revenue is. You really don't know. The legislature and the governor just reached a deal the other day, but then it's going to take weeks or in some cases months for the state to figure out what that budget bill that was adopted, what that actually means to us. It translates down, filters down, they say we get this much, or we get cut this much, or we get this more money. We won't know. We're literally not going to know that until substantially past July 1st. We'll get indications, we'll get ideas, but we'll get the real number that Greg Medici and his crew can number crunch and figure out what our numbers are really going to be like. So I think he said it's a living document, and boy, is that true. But in the private sector, you know what your budget is for the most part. You know what it is. You don't in schools, sometimes for months after you've adopted a budget. So I wanted to make that clear. The other thing I wanted to also emphasize is the budget deal that was cut between the legislature and the governor didn't solve the financial problems plaguing public schools in California. Even in the best of times, we're way underfunded compared to what other states fund their educational programs. We're also incredibly low funded as a district compared to other districts in California. So even in the best of times, money is tight. The deal that was cut did not solve our problems. It delayed, it reduced the amount that, excuse me, that we're being cut. Getting choked up about it. That we're being cut this year, but there's always a day of reckoning because the math is always the math is always the math. 2 and 2 is always 4. You wish it was 8, you wish it was 10, it's always 4. So ultimately, there's been some stuff going on in the legislature that is, they're using it, I'm gonna be blunt, they're using accounting gimmicks that's gonna get us through 2021. But there is gonna come a day of reckoning, probably in 21, 22, that we'll all have to. It's good news on the one hand, but when you delay fixing a problem, that problem financially, that problem almost always is a bigger one down the road. So with that, I need a motion.
So moved.
Okay, Susanna made the motion, Ken seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Opposed say no. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. We're on to 10.3, consideration of adoption of resolution 93, 1920 in the matter of ordering the regular governing board member elections, specifications of election order. This is a responsibility that the election code requires that we take, and we have to do it before June 30th, I believe. And is there any questions from board members?
Nope, but I'll make a motion.
There you go. Rachel has made the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, Susanna has seconded it. All in favor, say, any further comments or questions? Okay, all in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Opposed, say no. Motion carries unanimously. We're on to 10.4, consideration approval of addendum to the employment agreements for certain contracted management employees applying a one-year extension of term and or a salary adjustment. And Mr. Schmidt.
Thank you, President Marvel. This item presents for your consideration addenda for the employment agreements for the Assistant Superintendent of Educational Services, the Assistant Superintendent of Human Resources, and the Chief Business Officer, which, if approved, will extend the term of each contract by 1 year through June 30, 2022. In addition, the Chief Business Officer has now completed 3 years of employment with the district and has earned above satisfactory evaluations. As such, under the terms of his contract, he's entitled to a 5% longevity increment effective July 1, 2020. Approval of the addendum for Chief Business Officer will grant him that longevity increment, placing him on step 2 of the Chief Business Officer's salary schedule. As superintendent, I recommend the board approve these 3 contracts addenda as described and as presented.
Thank you. We received 13 comments, as stated earlier by Mr. Schmidt, on this item. The general gist of them was opposed to the concept of contract extensions and opposed to the concept of a salary step increase for our Chief Business Officer. Any comments from board members? Yes, Rachel.
I would just like to point out, as we all have many times in the last few meetings, that this approach is treating all of our employees with the same equitable treatment. If we get into budget situations where we have to relook at salaries, we will do that, but we're not going to single out the last person of the year to get what is due to them. I think it's fair to, because we have all commented on this, that we feel strongly about this as a board. It's about treating employees professionally. And I'd also like to add, the chief business officials are not easy to come by. Every time we have had to hire a new one, it has been an extensive process, sometimes going out and interviewing and not finding someone and having to start again. So we will treat our chief business officer well as we treat all our other employees.
Okay, anybody else? Mark?
Yeah, just a perspective, because again, lots of energy in the community, and let's call it what it is, a lot of anger right now in the community. Again, this is my perspective, and I know it's not shared, is when you look at an organization, you always look at 3 key stakeholders. You got your investors, your customers, and your employees. We don't have an organization without high-performing employees. And in this instance, when we brought our CBO on board, we negotiated a contract that we thought was market. All of us thought it was market at the time. That contract has a specific step increase provision in it. 3 years later, he satisfies the conditions of that contract. He is now due that step and column increase. If we as an employer were to vote down that contractual provision, I think it would chip away at the integrity of us as an employer. Because again, this is a contractual obligation. This is not a new raise we're offering. It is the satisfaction of an employment contract. Just my perspective.
Okay. Anybody else? Ken, Susanna? No? All right, I'll speak up. Yes, I agree with what Rachel and Mark have said, but a lot of comments that we got on this item looked at it from a private sector perspective. Because let's face it, most people that live in this valley don't work for public agencies, they work for private companies. Some of the people on this very board work for private companies or have worked for private companies. So the reality is what we're doing for our executives is absolutely no different in terms of offering an employment contract than you would see in a corporation environment. You hire an assistant CEO, which is what our chief business officer is the assistant CEO, happens to be in charge of finances. And those CBOs or CFOs, whatever term you want to use, in the private sector, they have contracts. They have employment contracts. They give them bonuses after reaching certain plateaus, certain years of service, stock options, whatever. They're also at-will employees in the private sector. And guess what? So are all our executives. They're also at-will employees. A contract doesn't absolve you of, they're not suddenly a tenured employee where, you know, you can't get rid of them. You actually can get rid of them, but under the terms of the contract. So the private sector and the public sector, from an executive perspective, are absolutely identical in the sense of having a contract. What we don't offer our CBO, we don't give them stock options. We're not a stock company, obviously. But we can terminate any of our assistant superintendents, whether it's the CBO or any of the other assistant superintendents. We can do it for cause or without cause. We've simply decided we want to go in a new direction. And knowing that, we've agreed to a contract that gives them a period of time. They get a heads up, if you will. They know if we don't, we've done that, and this board has done that. We've told somebody we're not renewing your contract. In May, your contract isn't going to be extended out another year. So your contract will be expiring in 1 year, and we're not renewing it. It gives them a heads up so they can start looking. If on the other hand, we as a board, as the employer, believe that those executives are doing a great job, and we'd like to assure them that they still have the confidence of this board, we give them a extension, a 1 year extension on the contract. And by the way, that's what every public agency does. That's what every private sector company does for their executives. So we're not doing anything any different than any other major employer is doing. I'm a little, I think people don't understand what our contracts are doing. They're also ensuring that we can attract. If you hired an at-will executive without any employment contract, you would have a different mix of candidates in that pool than you would if you hired them an employment contract. It's just a fact. On the CBO, Rachel, you couldn't have said it better. Every single one of our employees is on a salary schedule. A custodian, a bus driver, school office manager, a principal, a teacher, a librarian, a school nurse. Everybody is on a salary schedule, and they move across that schedule based on years of service. It happens to be our CBO's turn to move across the schedule. And we're not doing it. Somebody said, well, it's discretionary. You could say no. No, we have a contract we signed in good faith with that CBO that said, if you met the criteria, you got above satisfactory evaluations, you're doing a great job for us. At the end of 3 years, we're going to offer you a step increase so you can move over another step on your salary schedule, your range, if you will, that we pay. And that's what we're doing. So I understand people's concerns in that they need to understand that we are minding the store, that we're taking care of our fiduciary responsibility to the taxpayers of this district. I guarantee you, we absolutely are. We receive rave reviews from our county superintendent's office whenever we submit our budget. We're known statewide as one of the best fiscally managed districts in California. I'm just saying. And a large part of it, frankly, is because of the quality of the chief business officers that we've hired over the years, including our existing one, Greg Medici. So with that, we had a motion. Did we not have a motion yet? I don't think we did. All right, Ken, you're making the motion. Is there a second? Rachel is seconding. Any further discussions or comment? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Opposed say no. Motion carries unanimously. We're on to 10.5, consideration approval of the SRVUSD Special Education Local Plan Area SELPA Annual Service Plan and Annual Budget Plan for 2020-2021. Christine.
Yes, thank you, President Marvel. This is a yearly submission of the SELPA's local plan, and it's our special education budget covering our services provided district-wide and budgeted for our infant and preschool programs through our federal and state grants.
Okay, any questions for members? Any comments? Oh, Rachel.
I was just going to move approval.
Okay, made a motion. Rachel's made a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Susanna. Second. All right, any comments or questions? Hearing none, I'll call for the question. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye, opposed, say no. Motion carries unanimously. We're on to 12.1 board member reports at 10:56 in the evening. No, that wasn't a hint. No, really. Any comments or board reports from board members?
Just real
Hearing none.
quickly.
Oh, okay, yes,
Real
Susanna.
quickly, sorry, I have to share this because it's, I'm working with a Papa, a Tri-Valley chapter, which is our Asian Pacific group. And we actually are taking on some interns. And one of the projects that I'm part of is actually having the interns do a mock school board meeting. So I thought I'd just share that.
Good, wonderful. All right, any other board reports? Hearing none, I'm going to turn to the superintendent. Do you have any reports? Oh my God, the man is speechless. I'm impressed. Where have you been all of okay. With that, we are adjourned, everybody. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.